Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tetracast. This is RPG Site's weekly podcast where we get the site staff together to talk about our favorite genre of video games. My name is Brian Vitale, and we've got the usual crew here again today. So I've got George Foster.
Hello, everyone.
Got Josh Torres.
It's Monster Hunter season again. Yeah!
Yep, Monster Hunter Rise is probably going to be a big focus of this podcast. Spoiler warning. Joining me is Adam Vitale.
Hey, guys.
And James Galizio.
I've put too much time into Monster Hunter in this life.
Yeah, like literally last night and this morning, we were already just getting the staff together and had a few people do some co-op hunts, a lot of people sharing their thoughts. Obviously, we'll talk about the review that James published for our site. We also had a few things this week with the Future Games Show and some indies. Nothing like too exciting, but a few tidbits that we can pull from those. But before we get into that, we're going to go into what we've been playing this week. And let's start with games that are not Monster Hunter Rise so that we can then ramp up into it as we get into our feature like loadout discussion. Which means I think I have to pick on Adam first. So you thought we were going to talk about Monster Hunter? No, we're going to continue on about dungeon RPGs. I'm sorry,
Right.
Adam, I'm putting you on the spot. It's up to you to make
I mean,
this.
to be quite honest, I didn't have that much to say any more than I did last week.
You
So I
pivoted
finished-
from Saviors of Sapphire now to sort of City, right?
Exactly. So I finished Saviors of Sapphire Wings, which, just to summarize my thoughts from last week very briefly, it's fine. It basically has all of the usual like gimmicks and trappings and container that these experienced developed RPGs always have. So it's a pretty decent introduction to them if you haven't played any, but it is just kind of stale. It's okay. It's not especially an interesting game. So I finished that, and now I'm playing the other game that was sold. The game is sold as a 2-pack. It's literally called Savior of Sapphire Wings / Stranger of Sword City. It released last week or a couple weeks ago on Switch and PC. So now I'm playing Strangers of Sword City, which is a re-release actually. It's immediately a much more interesting game. It has much better art style, better music, kind of honestly better everything. So this release is actually kind of interesting in that first of all, they added an easy mode, so it's not as punishing as it was before. Before, it was a really hard game, so kind of maybe off-putting to people who just don't like, aren't really striving for the challenge. But it has an easy mode now, so that's I'm actually replaying it, so I am admittedly just kind of playing it on easy since I've already played it once before. But also, I didn't realize until this last week, NIS America actually did improve the localization of it. It just characters sound more natural. It's just before it wasn't like an absolutely terrible localization, but it wasn't really good. It was just kind of, it was a dungeon RPG kind of characters just sort of, it wasn't really the storyline is fine, but it's not really the crux of the game, but it's been improved.
Just
quite a
double
lot.
checking. When you say they sound more natural, you just mean like coming across in text because there's no voice acting, right?
There's Japanese voice acting, but yeah, I just mean text.
When you say sound more natural, all right. And
Yeah, I
for
just
someone
mean,
like
like,
me, where I've
they just
always
sound
seen
like
these two
They
games,
sound like human beings rather than more like robots or whatever.
so I always see these two game titles obviously paired together because they literally are here. What is like the key difference between them? Like what is one thing that is bespoke to Strangers of Sword City that is completely different from Saviors of Sapphire Wings?
Well, I mean, they're both dungeon crawler RPGs, but they are the world and storyline in them are. I think they're like technically connected, but they're just like different stories, different characters, different worlds, really. So picturing in your head, Saviors of Sapphire Wings has this more like anime-ish art style to it. You're basically just fighting the demons of a demon lord is basically the crux of the game. Stranger of Sword City, what that is, it's got this kind of like it's kind of got this Western influenced Japanese art style, if that makes sense. It's hard to describe, of course, with words. But it's not really anime style. I believe the artist is Raita Kazuma, who did like the original Xenoblade art and Runerzia and other games like that. And in this game, the premise is that your character was on an airplane in like the modern world, and the airplane gets basically sucked into like a magical vortex storm thing, and you end up in this different world, and that's why you're called a stranger. And it's sort
That
of got
actually
this.
helps a lot. So like, oh, Stranger Sword City, that's the isekai or whatever.
Yeah,
one of
it's
my
basically
favorite
an isekai.
things, one of my favorite little like dumb bits of lore is the reason why strangers are so much stronger in this world is because there's literally less gravity. So
Yep.
since your bodies are used to Earth's gravity, you can do more.
I think I
Yeah,
saw
so,
this
like-
on Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, it's a Dragon Ball Z thing, right? But yeah, so like that's sort of the in-game like explanation for like. So this game is a dungeon crawler, so there's not really like animated cutscenes or cinematics or things like that. But characters can, flip in the air and fight wyverns and things like that. So that's the explanation of how they can do that. It's not just hand waved. It's like, oh, your strangers actually can just do that because the gravity is lower here.
So Stranger's kind of like a title. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so like there have been multiple characters that have been transported to this world, and they're all called strangers. And generally, the crux of the storyline, it gets a little bit more involved in this, is that you're trying to find a way back home. So you kind of team up with other strangers to do that, and then of course there's other stuff that happens. But I'm enjoying it. Like I said, it's a much more interesting game than Savers of Sapphire Wings. It is, even with the easy mode, it is a little bit more tough. Like, for example, you cannot save in dungeon. In Savior of Sapphire Wings, you can basically save anywhere. So that's, you always have a backup. You can just save before every battle if you want. Here, you cannot. So if you trek deep into a dungeon and then you get, killed or whatever, you're going to lose more progress. But it's honestly probably the best game from Experience so far. I'm really eager to see what Undernauts is like, because I know they were working on that for quite a while. So hopefully it's their best foot forward, and we'll be seeing that later this year. But right now, like, of all the Experience Inc. dungeon crawler games, Stranger of Sword City Revisited is their best one. I think that's that's probably not an uncommon opinion. Maybe some people might say Demon Gaze. I thought Demon Gaze had some weird quirks, but in any case, Stranger of Sword City has much better art than Demon Gaze.
Would you say this release of this bundle of Saviors of Sapphire and this updated re-release of Stranger of Sword City, like, would that be like a good like gateway to an experience RPG? It's like, hey, I'm new either to dungeon RPGs or experience type dungeon RPGs. Would this be a good package of like having Saviors of Sapphire as like the gateway to dungeon RPGs to understand them, even though it's bland, it's simplistic at least, and then they can, like, if they want to continue that, at least they have another game in that package and like say, okay, I'm into like this dungeon RPG formula, but I'm not ready for like the crazy stuff yet, so I'll do the easy mode of Stranger of Sword City. Then would that be an interesting, like a natural progression?
Yep, I think so. The
Is the best experience game better than the worst Etrian Odyssey game?
what's the worst Etrian Odyssey game? My opinion is the worst Etrian Odyssey game is 2, but it's not even bad. It's just sort of
Yeah, it's hard to. They're so different in my opinion, because the how they're just, even though they're both dungeon RPGs, their core structure is so different that it's hard to compare them one to one, I'd say.
yeah. So the experience games kind of have their own like. It's hard to explain. So Etrian Odyssey games are more like based around the job systems in there, and like classes and multi-classing and things like that. And while experienced RPGs have jobs as well, and there's also some multi-classing sort of things you can do, although it works differently. There's just other components to the game that are much more prominent in Experience Inc. RPGs. That like dungeon traps and how you gain equipment, and skills that you can use in the dungeon. Like, for example, you can have skills that lower your or raise your evasion and raise your hit chance and lower enemies' attacks against you. And so there's just, I would say the broad answer to your question though is this is probably a pretty good introduction to it. It's just unfortunately the more interesting game is probably the game that's a little bit harder to get into.
Yeah.
So
And also, like, once you like get to Stranger Sword City, you kind of have now that you're developing a mindset of like how dungeon RPGs operate, especially when it comes to interfacing with the environment itself. With your
Yeah.
dungeon
And I
buffs.
will say, I'm not sure how much Savior Sapphire Wings has this, but considering experiences other dungeon crawlers, I'm sure it kind of has the stuff like, oh, here's a water dungeon where you can't use magic or
yep,
stuff
it has
like
all
that.
those usual gimmicks.
So it's like,
So
if you're new to dungeon crawlers,
yeah,
if you're new to dungeon crawlers, I would definitely say play the easiest mode on Stranger Sword City, just because like I have friends that they even outright say that like the normal mode on Stranger Sword City is like the closest thing to a wizardry, like modern day wizardry, you're going to get in regards to difficulty. It doesn't hold your hand. So
my personal, just to be a little bit more like personal anecdote here, I actually played another dungeon crawler, Elmanage Gothic, before I played any Experience Inc. game, and that game is honestly like bullshit hard. It is ridiculous, and I think that has forever like what's the word, biased my challenge like reception on like how difficult these games are, because none of them are as difficult as that. And I actually played that first. That was like my, besides like Etrian Odyssey. Actually, did I play that before Etrian Odyssey? I think I did.
That's you
So-
training at 100 times gravity.
Yeah, so like I kind of like struggled my way through that game, and then playing other RPGs like, oh, this isn't so bad, even though they might be pretty hard.
Gothic was PSP or was it DS?
It was originally a PSP 3DS game, but the English localization was actually a PC port.
Right.
The funny thing is, apparently, like other Elmanage games are not that hard. I think there's like Elmanage Original also on PSP and PC.
I played a little bit of Gothic and I was like, I had to dip out. I was like, oh, this is...
Yeah, it's literally bullshit hard. It's the sort of thing where that game, just to be on a small tangent here, random battles can be much more difficult than boss fights, because like in random battles, enemies can summon other enemies, and sometimes you'll just run into a random battle where there's like 12 enemies, and then they'll just keep summoning more and more, and you're like, stop it.
Yeah, imagine if every random encounter in a JRPG that you encounter was like the 4 to 5 waves of reinforcements.
Yeah. Whereas a boss is usually just like one acting enemy and maybe like a 2 sidekicks, but they don't reinforce all the time. So anyways, so like I that's the sort of game where it's like it was very challenging and honestly kind of bullshit. But yeah, I'm about halfway through the game now, I think. I've already encountered some. So this is a re-release. I've only played the original Vita version. There was a second Vita version, and this is a re-release of that. I've already encountered some new content. It seems to be like nothing like story critical or anything like that. It's just, a dungeon crawler, like, oh, here's another dungeon floor with some more traps and monsters.
This is Stranger Sword City Revisited that you're talking about.
Yes. Yep. I think that's all I have to say.
Yep. So I'm looking at the other list of games here, and it's Monster Hunter listed several times. To continue to tease the point, James does have a couple games mentioned really quickly that he also played, I assume, before Monster Hunter released a few days ago. But I guess he also did the review for it. So I guess I'll let just James, if you want to skip right into Monster Hunter, go ahead. But if you want to talk about the other games, you can do that too.
I'll say Monster Hunter. Yeah, I'll save Monster Hunter for later, since obviously there's 2 other people in this podcast that have been playing a ton of Monster Hunter the last couple of days. So EA Play finally came to Game Pass for PC, so I've been waiting for that to get around to playing Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
Yes!
Back in 2019, I actually did play a couple of hours of it at a press event. I enjoyed it. And because of that, I've always had it in the back of my mind that, I should get around to actually playing the full game and like finishing it. And I'm not quite done with it yet. Probably I'll be done with it this time next week. So a next podcast, but I'm pretty far in. I'd say maybe a little more than halfway, maybe closer to 2/3. I don't know.
How's your lightsaber looking? That'll give me a
It
hint
ju-
as to where you are.
I'm just going to replace it.
Okay. Yes. Okay, very
I
cool.
feel like I'm missing context
I
here.
love this game so much. Like I know where you
Yeah,
are.
I know exactly where you are now.
Am I right that it's about like halfway, 2/3 in or something like that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're close to the end. Yeah, you're
You're
Yeah, I
getting
would say
to the final
2/3.
stretch, yeah.
best bits coming up by far. Like this game. Sorry to interrupt you, James. Just obviously my passion has overridden me, but like this game, from as soon as you finish Kashyyyk, I was like, this is pretty good. Still probably the best Star Wars game in like years, but like, I'm not blown away. And then those last 5 or 6 hours, I was literally like, I'm in love with Star Wars again. I just want more of this.
So one thing I'll say is that regardless of everything else about this game, Respawn nailed one thing, and that's the set pieces. The set piece moments are just absolutely fantastic. They have a really good flow to them, and they're paced well. Like, they happen frequently enough that they do like keep the pace going, but they don't happen so often that it doesn't feel like you're constantly doing them.
Instead of just being like noise.
Yeah. I really enjoy it so far. It's basically just a Metroidvania. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
3D Metroidvania. I mean, it even like the map itself is basically ripped right out of Metroid Prime. So, but it's
The trilogy
it's
remaster is coming any day now.
yeah, hopefully.
Any day now.
Combat's all right, but I feel like that's the one main thing that they can improve with a sequel is a bit of the controls and the combat responsiveness.
Yes, absolutely.
Wall running doesn't feel as good as it should.
I hated the platforming. I liked the game. I hated the platforming in it, though, especially during some of the escape sequences in it. Like there's sometimes, like in my experience, like it was like nearly launch state when I played this, and there were just like some platforms that like Cal, the protagonist, just wouldn't like it wouldn't like reach it, or wouldn't like activate the state where it would
There was one specific platforming section on Zepho where you did 2 wall run jumps, or was it 3? And then you have to jump and try and grab onto a vine or a rope or something. And I had to do it like
they never work. Yeah.
And I'm sure, like, just specifically saying that, like, there's a couple on Zepho, but there's one specifically, and it's like one of the early ones where it just took me several tries to get it to land right. It was just like,
I'm kind of surprised
annoying.
to hear that that's still a thing. It's like, oh, they didn't fix that.
Yeah, so if there's one piece of advice, it would be definitely go back. I went through the trophy list, and there was this one that mentioned this hidden area on Kashyyyk, and I was like, oh, maybe it's just some dumb little reference, or maybe it's just like a room with a skill point in. But no, like it's a significantly sized map that has like some really cool things in there. When you do it, you'll know what I mean. I don't know if Josh knows what I mean from me saying it like kind of cryptically, but it's a really cool area.
Yeah, I think
I know what you're about. I love that game so much. Ugh. It's not
They
perfect.
have confirmed that they are working on a sequel, right? Is that true?
I think so. I think that they've mentioned it. Like, yeah, well, like there's probably a follow up to it, especially with the way it's sold. It's hard to imagine that they aren't.
I mean, it sold so well that it convinced EA to give single player games a chance again.
Yeah.
Thank
Jedi,
you, Star Wars and Respawn.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good. It's one of those games where it does have issues, but like the overall package and the fact that like they got this out in a relatively quick time span for like a AAA game for a genre that Respawn hasn't really done anything in. It's like there are issues, but overall it's great. It's one of those games where it's like I'm glad it happened. I feel like I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, but it definitely feels like out of the like broader franchise's most recent pieces of media, well, obviously now like people really like The Mandalorian and all that, but it feels like Fallen Order before that was like the one piece of media that all these Star Wars fans were like, finally, some good fucking food.
100%. That's exactly how I felt coming away from it.
A sequel to that game, I hope they nail it like out of the park. It has so much potential to just
And
really.
one thing, so some last thoughts. The visuals in the game are absolutely insane. The like artists, like the environmental artists on this game, absolutely nailed it. There's only like so many planets in the game, but the way that they make it so that even on the same planet, you have areas that while they feel like they belong on that planet, they look visually distinct enough to feel like separate. Like Zepho, like when you first land there's like all these hills, there's like these temples and whatnot. Then later on, there's this huge crash site of this giant ship, and it's really good, really good.
And the design of them, the way you navigate through them, it's like it has like a really good like flow to how you navigate these pieces. Like, okay, the environmental this environmental piece leads to this area. It makes sense of how it came to that. Just the way it's so good how they piece it together.
And this isn't a problem with the PC port, but it seems like it's a problem for every version. But the stuttering is kind of unfortunate. So even on a high-end PC, and I even like kind of mentioned this like earlier this week on the staff voice chat when I was like streaming it. So I have a Ryzen 9 5900X and RX 6900 XT rig. The game itself is installed on a Gen 4 PCIe SSD. I still get the loading stutters. I still get the random frame drops, even though my GPU and CPU utilization, even on a per core basis, isn't being maxed out. And it's not just my rig, because I've even seen people mentioning this that have an i9 10900K and an RTX 3090 having the same problem. So for whatever reason, this game's engine, it's asset streaming. It's Unreal Engine 4. So apparently I've heard things like about asset streaming being a problem. And maybe the sequel will be better about this because they'll have more experience with the engine. But it's frustrating because like 90% of the time I'm like a locked 120 plus FPS on max settings at 1440p, which is amazing. It's really nice, like the fluidity and the smoothness of it. But so frequently, just often enough to be annoying, you get those loading stutters, and then you just get the hitches that aren't because of my hardware, but they're because of the engine. And it's frustrating because it's like, I can see how well the game can run, but there's moments where the software is just not holding up.
I had a similar issue with Horizon's PC port where, surprisingly enough, despite how much flack that one got when it released, I ran it pretty well, with the exception that there was like a hitch every time the UI updated. So every time like a quest like objective got crossed out or whatever, it hitched, and I'm like, stop updating quests. Like, I don't want to see this anymore.
Yeah,
That's a different engine though. That would have been what, Decima? Is that the right one?
Decima. And I think I'm the only one here that's played Death Stranding on PC, so it's not the Decima engine's fault, because
because that Death Stranding was
Death Stranding's
basically
PC port is fantastic. So
I was gonna say, like, it's a high watermark, really.
Yep. I'll talk about Monster Hunter in a bit, but I guess I'll go from one Metroidvania to another. I finally played Axiom Verge this week. And
What? Just curious, what prompted this? Was it on Game Pass, or did you just like decide
no,
randomly to play it?
So I decided there was a reason why I wanted to play it. So I think I mentioned in the past, I'm in this like Discord server where people like we try and play 52 games a year, and sometimes we have like monthly games that we vote on and play, and then like quarterly games and whatnot. The monthly game for March was Axiom Verge. I didn't know what to play, and I was like, I've owned Axiom Verge since, God, I don't even remember when I got it. Whenever this is how I'll date it. So GameStop had this deal with IndieBox back in like 2017, or maybe a bit earlier than that, where they had boxed PC versions of indie games that they sold at their stores.
Yeah.
But most GameStops didn't have a PC section, so they had nowhere to place these. So you didn't even know they had them in stock unless you went online and checked. As a result of that, eventually my at the time local GameStop, once the system flagged these games for clearance, they just showed up on the floor for like $5 a pop. So I got the Axiom Verge physical Games Trust indie box thing, which has the DRM free installer for the game, a soundtrack CD, a Steam code, a manual / art book, and a steel book for $5. So that's when I picked it up because
nice.
I figured, well, that's a steal, might as well, even if I don't end up playing it. It's like a nice little thing to put on my shelf. It's $5. So I picked it up then, hadn't played it, which is funny because I feel like I'm generally a pretty big fan of Metroidvanias. So yeah, that was this kind of Discord group's monthly game. So I figured, you know what? I don't want to keep playing Fallen Order right now because I'm only on my laptop right now, which is 60 frames per second. So it's like, I'll play something that I'm not really missing out on anything for playing it on my laptop. So just sat down, played it.
60 frames per second. I'm just giving you a hard time.
So has anyone else played Axiom Verge here or no?
I've played it.
I haven't.
I've heard.
Okay. So Josh, did you like it or not like it?
I have fond memories of it. I actually liked the experience. I really like the way just general art style and general vibe. I think it didn't click with me until you got the ability to reprogram enemies and I got
The
that.
glitch gun, yeah.
Yeah.
So there was after I finished it, I looked through the negative Steam reviews to figure out if it was just me or if there was other people that had the same thoughts. There was this one Steam review that basically summed up my thoughts, saying that I started Axiom Verge liking it, but by the time I was over with it, I actually kind of hated it. I feel like, so obviously every Metroidvania is going to have backtracking, but the way that it works in Axiom Verge feels so obtuse and so annoying. It's like, it feels like they made that one central area where you can just quote unquote fast travel between points and use that as and since that was there, they didn't want to make it any easier for you to jump from one end of the map to the other. Whereas if I were going to make one change to the game, I would say make it so that the save rooms allow you to teleport.
Absolutely. I hope the sequel improves upon that. So to contextualize this, there are in almost old school Metroidvania fashion, it's easy to get lost in that game than to understand what your next objective is or where to go next. So by the back half of that game, there are certain places where you need to go specifically, but it's hard to know exactly how to get there. And the way that the map is designed, it doesn't give you the best tells of where you should go next. So the way that fast travel works in this game, from what I remember, is you have this gigantic head or something, or mechanical head that has a platform on top of it, and then you have to go on that platform and wait for it to make stops along the way, because those stops have linked to several different sections of the map.
I'd also say that as cool as some of the power-ups are, I feel like, well, first off, the way that not so much dashes, but the way that you can phase through walls and then eventually it becomes a dash works. It's bad. It's really, really bad. The fact that you have to double tap on your D-pad and wait for a second for you to phase through a wall that should have just been a button press. It should have been a button press.
Yeah, they're definitely weird design decisions that back then it was for me, like I said, when I look back, I remember it fondly, but I remember I did have experience frustration with it, trying to find the proper way, and what you're saying too is there are definitely weird design decisions, the way it controls as well, that you would hope, but it's cool that it was made, and hopefully that the sequel improves upon everything that we're saying.
Yeah, it's not that it's a bad game, it's just that it was a frustrating one. Especially this one boss fight. Most of the boss fights were actually pretty decent, I'd say, except for one. And I bet you know which one I'm going to talk about. The damn wasp.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah,
that is a bad boss fight. It is poorly designed.
Yeah, so the way that this wasp maneuvers, obviously there's a lot of aerial maneuvers it does, but you don't have the tools. You don't have like sufficient tools to really like get to deal with its cycles. Like you have this like you have like a decent amount of like things that can shoot from you, but the way it's at the angles that the wasp moves, it makes it a frustrating battle.
Yeah. And it feels like some of the bosses were designed where it's like, for the vast majority of the game, I didn't feel any real need to use more than like one or two of the weapon types. But then some of the bosses are like, oh ho ho, you need to use X weapon or you are just not going to deal any damage. So for like the bee or wasp, it feels like, oh, you need to use the shot that phases through enemies so you can actually hit its weak point when it opens its mouth. And then there's like one where it's like you need to duck and shoot the one weapon that is one big ball, and then if you press the attack button again, it bursts into like a 6-way like kind of nuke and stuff like that. It's like, and I don't think on paper that's bad, but I feel like if they were going to put much more of an emphasis in the boss fights with forcing you to switch between different weapons, I feel like they should have found a way to manage that with the regular enemies more too.
I also remember, just obviously I can't remember like much about the statistics of the game, but I remember struggling with the final boss of this game for a bit too, like the final phase of that, because you have to like move to different platforms, and the way that projectiles were moving on screen at that time, I was like, oh man, this is a lot, and navigating back to that final boss fight took like a decent amount of time as well every try.
Oh yeah, like especially near the very end of the game, I'd say that the game kind of gives up with enemy designs, and they just have it so that they're flying amorphous blobs that come and like shoot a bunch of bullets or have a laser that basically rotates around them, and it's hard to dodge. And it's just like, yeah, just and you don't really have adequate like again weapons to deal with them because there's no way to like really slow them down. Like in Metroid, you would have the ice rocket, which would let you like give you a moment to reposition yourself. You don't get anything like that in Axiom Verge. And for as much movement abilities you eventually get at the end, it's just, I don't know. I definitely feel like there's a lot of room for the sequel to improve, and I hope it does. I'm not getting it at launch. I gotta wait to hear like what people think about it. Not just people that enjoyed Axiom Verge, but people that like me that had real issues with the game design.
Yeah.
So
I'll probably still get
that being said, buy Axiom Verge to support the developer because there's that whole thing with his son that's really unfortunate, and it's a one-man team. Even if I have issues with the game, it's obvious that a lot of love and attention was put into it, and that family has gone through enough.
Yeah. I'm interested because the not to skip ahead in the news, because there was this whole future game show, but there was like a new glimpse of Axiom Verge 2 and footage and whatnot. But it was interesting to see that this the sequel is going to be a prequel to this one. It's not going to be like it takes place in the same universe, but I don't know how directly linked they are story wise. But this new protagonist that they have, like I think she has a melee weapon now, so it's interesting to see what
More
kind
Castlevania, less Metroid.
what kind of changes that'll bring and whatnot. And hopefully now that there's like it's very focused, like a snowy planet or snowy environment, like you were saying, hopefully there's like ways to slow enemies down if they're going to go that
There is someone listening to this podcast that just hates the word Metroidvania, and I'm sorry.
That's what the industry has accepted. We can't change it.
Well, I just think of it as like a nice heuristic where it's like if I need to explain what type of game this is in 2 words or 1 word, whatever, like you can use that as like your launching point, and then you kind of dial in from there to say like it has an art style similar to X or whatever similar to Y. But like that's all I think of it. Like I'm not saying this game is at like or similar or better or worse than those other series, but it's just kind of setting the table as like what sort of game you're talking about.
I guess as a final thought to this, when they were showing off the sequel footage as well, they showed some more like behind the scenes in development stuff. It was kind of cool to see like how fleshed out that this world is, like from the planning stages. Like the developer obviously has a lot of ideas that they want to present through the several games, and it was cool to see that like a lot of like this like world building like visually was actually sketched on this paper with a pencil, and it's like, oh, that's really cool.
Sometimes it's nice just to have a little bit of a analog. record keeping or note taking.
I'm still, for some reason, I don't know if it's just me, but I just like a big fan of like storing like archives of things or like in development things. I'm just like still in physical like things, not everything is done digitally. It's just like there's an actual there's a physical paper trail on it.
And there's
Literally,
a place that's not just like a directory on a drive.
Right.
So is that enough preamble, or is it Monster Hunter time?
Let's do this.
So I'm gonna ask George, since this is you played World, George, right?
Yeah, but like 20 hours, which we all know is like baby time for Monster Hunter.
Okay, well, I'm going to have George introduce this because he's the Babby. He's the new Monster Hunter player.
Oh god!
All right, George.
Right, spotlight. Let's do this. Monster Hunter Rise is the best Monster Hunter game ever made. The wire bug, incredible. There is a dancing monster now, and here's my spirit animal, and I finally have friends to play it with. It sounds really lonely, but like by choice now.
Out of context, I finally have friends to play it with. It's just like, oh man,
I love it though. It is fantastic. I don't know how far I'll get into it. I don't know if I'll stick with it until rank 7. I don't know if I'll give up at 4, but I'm really, really glad I'm playing it.
It's been very fun, playing with others, especially in here. Like, a lot of your time playing it, George, has been with me and Alex.
All of it has been with you and Alex Steenhouse.
It's okay. So let's preface this. Obviously, Monster Hunter Rise, the newest entry in the Monster Hunter series. As for now, Switch only, coming to PC next year. I'm very impressed with what they've done with this release. I think before we really get into it, I will say screw you, Capcom, for really screwing up the digital midnight unlock of this game. All right.
They literally waited until a minute after midnight to say, "Oh yeah, it's coming out in a few more hours."
Me and a good circle of my friends, and I'm sure a lot of Monster Hunter fans in North America are like, let's go. The Switch is really good about digital midnight unlocks for big games, and it released midnight for other territories just fine. Japan, Russia, Europe, and whatever. Every other region feels like they got their digital midnight unlock easily. And then Capcom's like, yeah, it's not unlocking till like 1 a.m. Pacific in North America, 4 a.m. Eastern, because and there's like announced a minute after midnight, as James said. And I was like, oh my god, what the hell? I'm like, all right. And I'll admit, I took the day off work for this release. So I'm like, all right, fine. So, but I woke up on Friday of the release at like 4:30 a.m. And I swear, within that day alone, I played maybe 13 or 14 hours of this game.
So I was working on Friday, and I poked into the Discord, and like in the morning, Josh was there, and then late in the afternoon after lunch, Josh was there, and then I kind of like cheekily said something like, "Don't you guys have jobs?" But then I was just kind of like, "Man, that's mean," because like I've done it. I've taken off days to play at lunch, so like so I'm like, you know what? I understand. Be you, like, go and do it. Do the thing. Do the damn thing.
I played a good chunk of our the members here. I played with James. I played with George here on the podcast. I played with another contributor to the site, Kazuma Hashimoto. Played it with him. Played with Alex Seedhouse from Nintendo Insider. Played with a lot of other friends. I've been enjoying this game a whole bunch, and I'm so eager to play more of it. I'm very happy with like how easy it is now to just get into multiplayer. It's like back in the old Monster Hunter days where they separate single player and multiplayer progress. But like but since with the wonders of modern technology, it feels like that barrier has like become even easier. You don't have to wait for back in World where you had to like go into this quest and like, all right, you have to go see the one-time cutscene to introduce this monster, and then after you both see that cutscene, now you can join each other. It's like this one's just, hey, you know what? From the get-go, like before I even did the tutorial mission to teach you the controls, you just have to go to this NPC at the new Kamura village, this cat NPC. It's like, hey, here's how you do the network features, and then just go at it so people can just join you and do like a 4-digit passcode, and then you guys are all together. The gathering hub it's very compact, but it's very easy to move around. It's small, but it's dense. So all the important NPCs are in the gathering hub. There's just like, and then there's like another room right by it that loads instantly. That's just like, hey, here's where you can craft your weapons. Here's how you do all your meowcenaries, which to gather items and whatnot. So it's like it feels so good to just like get everything done at once, pre-hunt, like from the get-go. Meanwhile, Monster Hunter World, it it was too expansive, like especially in base world where you had this main hub area that like took forever to get around in, and then
And not only that, but the gathering hub in base world was very lacking. They did improve it a bit in Iceborne.
yeah, but it was still kind of not there. And then and what sucked about it was like there was like still like loaded like considerable loading times uh going around it too. While this one just on the Switch version or the Switch release of Rise, it's just like, yep, you're here, you're here, you're here. Get this done, this done, this done. Okay, we're ready to hunt. Let's go. And it's so. I'm so glad that like they took the worst parts about World. It's like, you know what? Let's just make it better. And here you go. And
I saw some talk about a weird split between how story or quests work and how multiplayer quests work. Like you talked about the cutscene thing in World, which was frustrating as heck. But how does it work in Rise in terms of like single player progression?
So in Rise, you have this the village quests and hub quests.
That's
And
the two types of quests. I couldn't remember what they were called.
right, and village quests are all like the single player content with all the story, and hub quests are just, hey, go hunt with your buddies and just do like these key quests, and then after you do these two key quests, you'll do like a mission where you can co-op with other people, and then you can advance a hunter rank, and that's all it is from that. But all the improvements that you make, just advancing one or the other, like if you advance hub quests, and then you'll unlock like new like menu stuff or new food stuff, like all that progression is still carried over into your village quest. So like when you go back to the village hub and you unlock something, you'll still see all those village enhancements available to you. So it's not like a big like you're not holding yourself back for doing one or the other necessarily.
But the cutscene shuffling thing is gone.
Yeah, you don't have to do cutscenes. The only thing that that you have to do is like if you're aiding like a new player, for example, for the first time, and they visit like a new region for the first time, there's this brief cutscene that plays, and you can choose to skip it, but everyone has to agree to skip it if you want to skip it. But other than that, you're still all together, and those cutscenes are so brief and whatnot. So there's no waiting for.
This is a tangent, but I remember like in Iceborne, I believe it was the Shara Ishvalda fight. Like Capcom actually has that cutscene designed where like it will change depending on how many hunters are with you, and each hunter has like because part of the reason why the cutscenes didn't work earlier in multiplayer was because like only one person was animated, and like I guess they couldn't figure out how to split that in a multiplayer session. But then they made it so that on this fight, if you brought in 4 people, I think they might have also done this on the Sabi Jiva fight as well. It would show like all 4 or 3 or 2 of your hunters, but it would still have this weird like cumbersome. It was a mess.
Yeah, it still didn't feel like a great experience all around. And this
Because
one,
you still had to like do this weird like you've seen the cutscene, all right, now leave your quest and join mine and whatever.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's a way better in Rise.
it's definitely way better. I think the one thing you do miss out on playing multiplayer a lot is there are like the cutscene introductions for monsters. You only see them in single player, but those cutscenes are like awesome on their own, because every single cutscene in this game like that introduces a new region or a new monster, they're all Japanese haikus. So they have like this whole like ramp up to the escalation to them that like it's kind of neatly designed how they did that. I've played personally on Japanese voices. I don't know how it is in English or in Monster Hunter language, how well that translates. But because it's such a Japanese setting this time around, to me it makes sense.
Seemed appropriate.
It seemed like a really
haikus seem like they could be inherently more interesting than World. The reason why I keep comparing it to World, for context, is it's the only one I've played. So sorry, I'm
sure there's a lot of this.
Like but in World, all of the introductions is like, how many interesting ways can we have this dragon thing roar at you? That's pretty much all the monster introduction cutscenes in World. Which some of them are still great, but a little bit the samey. That's the word for it.
Yeah. Georgia's got alluding to it earlier, and I kind of want to hear more of Georgia's thoughts. Just kind of like the big thing about this game, like in relation to past Monster Hunters, is there's this new wire bug that he was talking about, where it really makes navigation and fights so much more fluid, because you kind of have like this Spider-Man almost skill now, where you can like fling out this bug and then you can like kind of swing on it, and you can maneuver up and forward, and then every single weapon has like a total of 4 different actions they can do with this wire bug. And the limitation of it is everyone has a limit of 2 wire bugs, but that they recharge over time after you use them. And then you can find a temporary 3rd wire bug out in the field, but it only lasts for a certain amount of minutes. But some wire bug attacks consume 1, some more stronger ones consume 2. But it's the cooldown is fast enough that like you don't feel too bogged down by missing them. It's like, okay, they're up again and whatnot. So George, like, tell me about like your experience with this new wire bug mechanic and how it affects your hunts now.
Well, I think one of my favorite things to do in World was always to try and like get above a monster and then to run. Like, you'll run and then you'll jump and then you smack them, and it always I don't know what it is, the impact on that always feels incredible. And my favorite thing that World introduced, or at least I think it introduced, I was always pretty sure it introduced, is like you'd react to the environment. So if you were like running down a hill, you'd slide. If you were like, you could climb stuff a lot easier. Like, I didn't think that was in previous Monster Hunter games, but it felt so good in World and it looks so cool to do. And then the wire bug just feels like the natural evolution of that. So you're using this thing, and then I remember when we played the demo of it for casual mode, like there were just times where one of us would like wire bug into the wall, and then you're doing flips off the wall accidentally, a wall running, and then you can like jump off again. And I'm a massive fan of movement systems in games. I think I've said this a billion times before. And it just feels like a new thing to master, right? Like all these, I'm so far behind on Monster Hunter that a lot of my tactics are just run in, hit it, run away if it tries to hit me. But with the wire bug, like, it lets players like me, or at least it lets me, I feel like I'm doing something. I feel like I'm kind of, I look cool almost. Like, I'm sure it doesn't come off that way if you watch me play it. Like, I'm just kind of darting around, but it's just a really cool mechanic. And again, 2 Monster Hunter games down, like I can't really say much, but I couldn't imagine a Monster Hunter game without it now. It is that cool of a mechanic. The worlds are just so big now. I remember I was playing with, I think this was last night, James, like, obviously James knows pretty much like where everything is, but he found this shortcut. We're at the start of one of the maps at the start, and James just starts like darting up the wall. He's like using his wire bug to get up, literally like Spider-Man. I'm like, oh, Walnut's up there. So I, much slower, I follow him, and I eventually get there, and he's just found this cave that like isn't marked on the map. It just leads it's like a tunnel. It just leads to the other side of the map where everyone else was. And it's just this moment of like, holy crap, how big are these maps? Like, how many hidden tunnels and ways of doing stuff like that are there? And it just made me appreciate the map design a whole lot more. Even if there's not like tons and tons of maps, each one is like its own. You have to learn it. Like everything in this game, you have to learn it. And going back to one of my favorite games, Spelunky, my favorite thing about Spelunky was learning. It was becoming the master of that game. And I get that vibe from Monster Hunter for the first time. I don't know what it is that's clicked this time, but I just feel like I'm taking it.
It seems like in general the game is not like compromised to much of any extent to being on Switch.
No,
in
not
terms
at all.
of size of the maps, draw distance, variety, all that stuff.
And whatever new Nintendo network infrastructure they put into this game, there was some talk about it weeks back. Like the playing internationally, like with George and Alex Seedhouse are both in Europe and whatnot, and playing with them, and Kazuma is in Germany. Like it wasn't like we played together. It wasn't like a big deal, Like sure, there'll be like some teleporting, like when they're like traveling to like one place to the next, but it doesn't really compromise like the real meat of the game, which is fighting the monster and reacting together and like devising strategies together of like how to take this thing down. Like there's not like a big like, oh no, like there's input.
George's Wi-Fi didn't let you down.
Yeah,
It didn't break it like Guilty Gear Strive.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, it's like it feels good to just play online together and whatnot. And there's not really a crazy compromise experience from that end. James, you're the one who reviewed it, both a video review and a written review, like a massive.
I want to hear about the video review because that's not something our site does often. But then
Yeah.
James, as he was reviewing this game, he just said, "I want to do this," and then he did it.
Yep. Well, I mean, I think I was the last person to do a video review before this too, because I did the Hero Must Die Again review.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I don't know. It just feels like I like the idea of video reviews, and even though it's a lot more work, it's fulfilling in a way because you have to put a lot more thought into how your words come across, because it's not just going to be on a page. You also need to have like visuals to kind of like back it up and stuff like that.
It's basically like self-substantiating. Like if I say something is true about this game or some feeling about this game I have, how do I visually identify that? Do I have the footage that matches that, or do I need to go get it? And I'm not an expert. I did like 3 or 4 video reviews back like circa 2017 and 2018, and you having done this one for Monster Hunter Rise has kind of like made me, when can I do that again?
Yeah,
I should make that a goal for the year.
And I don't think it's any surprise to folks that are listening to the podcast that as a site, at least a couple of us want to have a bit more of a focus on video, even if it's a side thing still, like to just make it so that the YouTube isn't just rotting away with nothing but random trailers uploaded to it, maybe once every like month or so. But
obviously we're all hobbyists here, so anything we do out of our own
exactly.
So basically the moment has to be right. We have to get the review code early enough where we have the time and resources to do it, all that stuff. So this was obviously born out of RPG site, was born out of a fan site in many ways, still has that identity. So just for some context.
Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on Monster Hunter Rise? Like, just after playing like 70 hours of it, you said?
75 at this point, I think, something like that. My Switch, when I go to my like full library view, it says it's now the game I've played the longest on Switch, and I think I put like 73 hours into Xenoblade 2 or something like that. So it's like, it's
until
over that
Xenoblade
now.
Cross gets its port.
I'll just keep playing it on, unless they add like substantial new content. I'll just keep playing it on 7. I'm sorry, but yeah. So obviously, I very much enjoyed Rise. My main problem stemmed from the fact that there isn't really a proper end game yet. Mm-hmm. Which, for the vast majority of people playing the game now, you haven't even gotten to the end game. So obviously, not many people can kind of see what I mean yet. I'll also say on a more personal level, I really enjoy the game, and it does. And I do think the wirebug system is fantastic. It makes the gameplay a lot more fluid. It's objectively a better game than some of the previous Monster Hunter games. But on a personal level, it feels weird because when I got started with the series, it was all like, it was methodical. And there was a lot of guff that you had to kind of like work around. Like you had to bring whetstones. You had to make sure that you brought hot drinks and cool drinks, which, by the way, those aren't even a thing in Rise anymore. Like you go into the Frost Islands, like your character, even if you're wearing like a really thin layer, apparently they're like just built different because they don't need to have anything like insulation.
Yeah, but even back then you had to bring paintballs because even
paintballs, and it's like
a monster would go to another zone that you have to load into, and then
you had to have a map, and there were monsters that could steal your map, so it'd be
Yeah, you had to bring multiple different pickaxes as well, depending on.
You had to bring nets. You had to bring even back in Freedom Unite, like it used, like now, if you're on a gathering point, it'll say, "Hey, you can press the A button here to gather." That wasn't added until Portable Third and Try and Freedom Unite. You just had to be on top of some place where you can gather, and then just spam the gather button. And it's like, I know I sound like a boomer saying this, but there was a charm to being forced to kind of like envision yourself in the world and be like, that looks like someplace you can gather. I'm going to do it. Or it's like, that looks like a shortcut. I'm going to go there and stuff like that. And the fact that you had to
compare it to World, like gathering points, you just have to tap A once now, like one tap of like a mining axe to an ore pile.
Yeah.
Where it's just like you get all the items. It's not like in World where you have to like hold it down and it'll hit it multiple times. It's just one tap now, and then you get all the resources.
Yeah. And again, I know that for most people, this isn't going to be a thing. And it's still a fantastic game. It's just, at this point, I feel like it's safe to say that Monster Hunter as a series is a very different type of experience as it was back on the PS2 and the PSP and even the Wii.
It's mainstream.
It's mainstream. It's polished. But I do enjoy Rise. It's really fantastic. And like, again, my main problems are the lack of endgame. And like, as like updates come in and like that gets fleshed out, and when the inevitable expansion happens, like I even said, this is probably going to eventually become my favorite game in the series. But there are aspects of it where it's like, I look back on the previous games.
Convenience.
This is reminiscent of the like I get you because I started with like really old Monster Hunter as well, but this also reminded me of like
the Nocturne thing.
The Nocturne thing is back at the last podcast about now it has like a quality of life feature to manually select skills now instead of back then where you just had to basically win the lottery of your skill selection when you enter the Cathedral of Shadows. It's reminiscent of that conversation, and I feel that too because like. As you said, like you really became more immersed and invested in the game's like each subsystem because you had to either find the guide or learn it like organically of like, oh, you can do this. Obviously, for like the legacy of Monster Hunter back then and the old ones, like there were just guides on guides on guides on top of guides of like, here's how you do things, or like here's where each like node is on the map, and like because it wouldn't obviously show you,
Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's like you said, I can't justify this to people. It's just one of those things that if you played back then and you got invested in the series back then like I did, and I'm sure part of it comes down to the way that I got introduced with Monster Hunter, where back on the PSP, unless you lived in Japan, you weren't playing multiplayer with anyone.
Yes.
You didn't have you didn't have any guides to go to. Gaijin Hunter wasn't a thing until after Portable Third. So I got into the series before he did. And it's just like, ugh.
Real ones played with a claw back then, all right? And you understood.
Now here's the real, here's the real cross for me, the bear. I got so used to the Monster Hunter claw on the PSP that when I played Try, I specifically did the claw with the Pro Control, the Classic Controller Pro. When I got 3 Ultimate, I used my Wii Classic Controller Pro so I could claw. I know.
When you say claw, do you mean like the way you're holding your controller? Because that's how I hold controllers normally. Yeah, it hurts.
Oh, you're built for this.
Basically, on the PSP, since if you wanted to be able to control the camera while also controlling your character movement, you had to kind of claw your index finger on top of the D-pad on the PSP because the camera controls for left, right, up, down are based off of the D-pad.
Yes.
And there was no lock on.
Yep. I can only imagine George's mindset is like, wow, you're nightmare people. Who are you?
No, actually, I was thinking when it's really, really interesting to hear you say that and to talk about like this game is objectively getting more accessible and arguably better, but that takes something away from it for you. Like that is genuinely so interesting to hear. And it almost makes me feel bad. Like when I'm playing it, I'm like, oh, this game smack monsters with heavy weapons. Like for James, clearly, like it means a lot more. And for me, I almost feel like I take it for granted in a way. Like I take for granted the fact that I can do all this stuff and it's so much easier now. And that's just a really unique viewpoint to have. I think that's just generally really interesting.
Well, I have a similar, but obviously to a lesser extent, experience with going from World to Iceborne. I remember in early World, I would constantly have expeditions where I'd go get honey so I could make mega potions, or I would fight Odogaron and his type of monster to get, I think it's like nourishing extract to make max potions and ancient or some type of like better potion. And like I actually had to like manage that resource. And if you ask Adam, like he would say like a key part of any good RPG, whether or not you consider Monster Hunter an RPG aside, is resource management. But then in Iceborne, they added like this smithy mechanic thing, which basically is just like an in-universe way for them to just shower you with stuff. You just get like gobs and gobs of mega potions and ancient
Yeah.
potions and tranquilizers. And like eventually it stops ending up being like a mechanic at all. Your box has more than you'll ever need. You just top off, you go to your loadout, and you have as many as you'll ever want, and you never have to think about gathering that resource again. So I thought, like, even within the same game, I lost
Yeah.
something there. Go ahead.
I feel like the best way to kind of to describe the gulf in quality of life features that World has compared to like how it was in Freedom Unite. So you know the way the meow scenarios work. You just send out cats to like gather materials and stuff, and you basically have them like go on a set track, and you just after like a certain number of hunts, they're back. You get your materials. There's no active input from you. The way things worked in Freedom Unite is that you had a specific farm, and there was like mining nodes on one side where you had to specifically mine them yourself. There was an actual farm where you had to specifically gather them yourself. There was things that you could do, like you could set it up where it was easier for you to get one thing from X, Y, Z, et cetera, et cetera. There was like a separate gathering node for mushrooms. There was a tree where you have to time it to gather insects. You did have a cat you could send out to gather stuff, but it wasn't like the meow scenarios and was like only one thing. And it's like every time you have to go back and send them out every single time. It's as much extra work and fluff that seems like as much as that might seem like extra work and fluff now, back then it really did contextualize the fact that you are specifically every piece of material in your arsenal, every piece of equipment that you eventually craft, you know exactly where you got that material.
Yeah, can you like imagine like for George, like imagine us like doing a Rathian fight in Rise. Like back then you had to like spend like maybe 40-45 minutes, even maybe an hour, like starting to like gather materials for that fight of like,
Holy
all right,
crap.
this is gonna be a big fight. We need to be really prepped up for this fight, you know. So you have to go through all that manual labor almost of like, all right, I need to like this amount of like pots and this amount of like stamina pots, this amount of this and this amount of this, just to like survive this fight. And like that's what made it like more special back then, in a way of like this was the fight. So
Yeah.
I had to be prepared, built for this.
I'm gonna sound like a zoomer here, which is weird because I have played once
You're,
before, but
you're just balancing it out for us.
for me, like doing what I have to do for a fight in Rise, even like, oh man, I have to remember to eat, and oh man, I have to remember to like press this one button to restock. Like to me, that seemed like work. I was like, it's effort. And now I'm looking at it, I'm like, sorry guys, it's like hundreds of hours.
Yeah, things are different now, but it's fine. You know, like a lot more people are enjoying it, having like because at the core of Monster Hunter, what people really want to be doing is fighting the monsters. You know.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying that Monster Hunter should go back to this. I'm just saying from a personal standpoint,
it's different now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can always go back to Freedom Unite if I hate myself.
Same. But it's going to be weird
By
now.
the way, earlier I said Smithy, but I meant Steamworks. I said the wrong thing.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. It's going to be weird now because, like, we're like, not even just the wire bug, like just having the Palamute now, the dog variant of Palicos, essentially. They're the new creature in Rise. Like, they really change things up in terms of navigation because they really make navigation very snappy. Since they don't have like a stamina bar, you just like call them, you ride them.
I've yet to see a person online that's used the Palico instead of the Palamute just because of the extra mobility.
Yeah, like a friend of mine like has been trying to do the Palico, but he's always trying like
wait for me.
The weird thing about Palamute is that especially when you're grouping it with 4 players, is that they participate in battle, so it becomes more. There's a lot more things on screen going on, hitting the monster and whatnot. And for some palamutes, they have the default weapon is like this chain-like weapon, which can actually like hit other people and you, like interrupting your attack. So like me and like another circle of friends have already been like, okay, what's the best way to still have this palamute, but not have it interrupt in battle and whatnot? Because now we're just wishing that it didn't like take part in battle with us, because there's so many other things on screen. There's even like the default settings for like hit effects is crazy, especially when you're fighting with three other players, because there's so many particle effects going on that there's like a setting now where you can like make these hit effects less, and that's the more preferable option, because now you can actually see what in the world is going on when you're up close with the monster and everyone's hitting it as well. So that's been a big like change for me just recently, which is like lessening those hit effects and making it and equipping my palamute so it's not like having this chain sickle weapon. It has like these ninja scrolls, so it's taking on a more like support-ish role in combat, so it's not getting in the way so much. As well as the camera distance option that I didn't even know was in Rise until like this morning, of just uh, like scaling the camera back so I have a bigger, more wider view of like everything going on. So, but the convenience of having a palamute, even though there's like these inconveniences in the way of combat, like the way you utilize it out of combat is so key, because of getting navigating from one place to the next. It's so fast. It can climb up vines so fast, and then you can sharpen on the back of it as well. So like you're still mobile as you're sharpening and whatnot fairly quickly. And then it's just the any cons it has, it like vastly outweighed by the pros of just having it going around. And now thinking forward of like, what does the Monster Hunter series look like after Rise with new installments without the wire bug or without the palamute? Are they still are they now core features of the Monster Hunter series, or how are they gonna like advance forward without these like new mechanics that make it so much more enjoyable to play just like rapidly?
Well,
That is a good question,
I
just to see like what do you think will carry forward? Because like what does Rise have that World dropped? Or sorry, what does Rise have that was dropped from World? Like the Clutch Claw obviously is not a thing in Rise, which was kind of like a big selling point of Iceborne. So it could
But
easily go on that whatever follows Rise doesn't have palamutes.
the funny thing is those clutch claw mechanics are still in Rise with the wire bug, because now,
Ah, I see.
yeah, like since you have these silk bite attacks, after you hit them enough, they become rideable. So you can actually ride monsters, kind of like Monster Hunter stories, oddly enough, in Rise. And then now, when you're riding them, you can do like a light attack, heavy attack, and you can like bash them into the walls, just like how you would do it with a clutch claw in Iceborne, to kind of stun them after like 3 bashes into the wall. Or you can ride them into other monsters and just have them duke it out and do a lot of damage, and have them have mats fall out of them as they're fighting, duking it out and whatnot. And so in a way, the clutch claw didn't really leave. Like, it's just recontextualized in a different way in Rise. Yeah, but like, right now, just the with where I am in Rise, like obviously I'm gonna get to that point where there'll be no like end game content. I have to wait for like the monthly updates and whatnot. Like they already said recently, like the next big update for this won't be till like late April, and that will I don't know if that's gonna finish the story or whatever that is, but I'm having just progressing right now. It's been a lot of fun. The changes they made to it are very smart. Makes hunts like much more mobile and very flashy and exciting. And while I'm not the biggest fan of like what they like, this new rampage mechanic is the one of the things in Rise that it's kind of its own like thing, where now you have like this tower defense section where there'll be hordes of monsters coming in, and then you have to do these installation platforms. There'll be like auto turrets you can set up, or you can have multiple turrets that you can set up to fend off this horde mode type deal, or like have these limited time like heroes from the village come up, and they're super powerful to fend off this horde. Like, this rampage mode is like, it's okay. It's a lot better than what World had, was the Zora Magdaros or whatever sections, where they were
The
just
siege
awful.
battles, yeah.
Yeah, the siege battle. They were just like bad, because they were for people who don't know, in World, like there's these story quests where you had to fend off this gigantic monster coming, but it was very slow to approach. So you're kind of just waiting around, firing off cannonballs towards it, and then when it comes, you have to mount the monster and actually navigate through this like terrain on this monster, and you have to go find these cores, and after these cores, you have to like go to like the front of it and whatever. And like these
It almost sounds more interesting on paper than it's really a slog. Trust me.
Yeah, it really is a slog. So they're better than those, but the bar is so low to like be better than that. It's like, the rampages at least are more exciting, but they're still kind of a drag, and it's more fun with more people. If you do these single player, I imagine it's like, oh
Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing them single player. It's just be.
Did you do these single player, James?
The
Rampages?
the rampages. Yeah, I did the first high rank one solo, and that was a nightmare.
This was the first Apex monster.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
god, yeah. Me and
Yeah,
Alex House did it like last night, I think, and that was
yeah. I helped you guys with it.
Oh yeah, you did. That's right. Sorry. But yeah.
That's why I said, like, I do think that rampages eventually lose their luster a bit, mostly because you always have the same like things you can drop into nodes, and there's no real like separate maps. There's just the one map. I feel like if they even just added a different map with some changes there, or even made it so that for endgame ones there are separate like gates leading into a central one. So if you're playing in multiplayer, you maybe might want to have like two people on one like path and like two people on the other. Like there's ways for them to improve it and make it a lot more interesting, and maybe they'll do that with content updates. But I definitely feel like as it is now, it starts out fun, and like the first couple of times you do it with a group of friends, it's really, really fun. It's really entertaining, but then you start to see, oh yeah, it's basically the same. I don't know.
yeah, it's I don't know what's like the right answer for this. Obviously, when you think about the Monster Hunter development team, like obviously they want the core experience is still there, but they also want to shake it up, like in the context of the story of like what can we do to like kind of mix it up, make it different, and like those attempts to do that have largely been, it's been more of a drag, more so than like bringing excitement to it, and it's a hard question to solve. But I think it's really impressive. I really like that. In comparison to World, there's a lot more monster skeletons. Like you have like the bears now. Like the Gauss Harag was one of the new monsters they've been showing in the trailers. Like this snow ice bear that can like get out ice blades throughout the fight, and that's a really funny monster to fight. The Kezu is back from older Monster Hunters, and it looks so disgusting.
So veiny.
Yeah, the Kezu is kind of like this like weird, like pale.
Do we have to describe it?
Monster that has like no
Is that a
eye.
Kezu in your pants, or are you happy to see me?
I want to hear about this breakdancing monkey that George
Oh,
likes.
Bisha 10. Yeah,
the best one. Right.
Go.
So I said this when we were playing. We played it earlier. I think we were playing it literally like an hour before the podcast. I've never liked a Monster Hunter monster. Like people are like, oh my god, I love this. I love Pookie Pookie or whatever. And they go, oh, Raffian, that's cool. And I'm like, yeah, I can appreciate their designs. I can, I get people. People might like them. I like the Palicos and Palamutes, but they're just dogs and cats, so that doesn't really count. And I was like, yeah, I just don't get why people get like it so much. And then we ran into this, what's it called, a Bishaten, and we ran into it and like, oh, it's just a kind of monkey with wings. It looks okay, and then it starts throwing fruit, and I was like, that's kind of funky. I like that. That's different. That's cool. Like it poisons you, but not for its tail. I think it has a tail.
Yeah, it has a tail that it actually stands on. Like it's the idle posture is
like a pole.
Tail,
yeah.
Its tail extends like a pole, and then it stands like that. And then the fruit it tosses out. Those are the poisonous ones.
And that's just cool. Like that's unique. That's every other monster claws and tails and stuff. This one's just weird. And then the further you get into the fight, the more like aggravated it gets. It just starts like it is just like tumbling around, but it looks like it's breakdancing because it's just like flipping around on its legs, and you're just looking at it like, go monkey, go! Like that's so cool. And it was just one of those moments where you see beyond the veil. I don't want to pretend like I've had like some seeing eye experience. Suddenly I get Monster Hunter or something, but like I was just looking at it, I was like, well, they do put so much effort into these monsters. And I'd really love to see this one in HD. Like I've never thought that before of any other monster, but this one is just like, it's just such a vibe. I loved him.
Yeah, there's a specific like attack sequence that the Biomutant has later on, where it'll do like it'll jump from place to place as it flips around, and then like the last jump, it lands on its head. It does like a breakdance pose as it last jump on its like doing a headstand as well.
I love it so much.
It's a very cool just animation wise, very cool fight. And obviously the one that you really liked as well was the fight with the flagship monster, Magdamalo. It's like kind of like
Oh
a
yeah,
purple
that was cool.
electric thunder lion almost. That fight is really crazy as well, because it's one of the first like early fights that you do as you're advancing low rank. You're like, hey, there's like a Magdamalo, go take it out. It's like, all right. And then they even say, hey, I know it's kind of a lot to ask for your hunter rank at the moment, but can you please go check up on it? Like, all right, I guess. And then you get to that fight, and it's like spewing out like hellfire clouds that'll like it'll ignite on impact with the ground and whatnot. And that's an insane fight. It'll like explode around it. It's very aggressive.
Yeah,
And that's one of those key moments in the
visually stunning as well.
Yeah, you're just like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah.
And that's when you start to learn. It's like, oh, I have to respect this monster's attacks, because if you push up too aggressively on it, it'll just snap back at you, and it'll just like, oh,
You're
I'm
dead
getting
now.
killed. Yeah, you're. Oops.
So what weapons are you guys all using?
I'm using hammer for this one. I used bow in World and Iceborne, but the hammer in this one is so fun to control. One of its silkbind attacks that you use with a wire bug is you fling yourself up in the air and you spin like a Beyblade all throughout it. And it's like, oh man, this feels great. So I've been rocking hammer. It's been a lot of fun for me.
I've been pretty basic, and I've gone for switch axe. Before that, I was doing dual blades, and I was like, yeah, dual blades for life. I need the speed. But then, like, as soon as you see the damage numbers on any other weapon, you're like, oh, maybe I won't use the dual blades. I'll probably go back to them because I really like the its mechanic. I don't know if it's called like Enrage or something like that. That's what I've
Like
always
mode.
Yeah, that, and you just move so much faster with that. It's the only. Well, the insect glave's pretty fast as well, but it's the one that like feels right for me as like a character action fan. But now I've ditched it, so who knows? Maybe next week I'll be Gunlance.
Yeah, but right now, like you're doing switch axe, you said.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more basic weapons than switch axe. I played like hundreds of hours of World Longsword. So if I ever do get into Rise, I'm committing to playing any other weapon, not Longsword.
Yeah, I hear longsword's pretty basic. It's like it's one you start. Isn't it?
It's a low. Well, how do I word this? It seems like it's got a high skill ceiling, but it's also just pretty easy just to play pretty well without a lot of skill.
Yeah,
So-
it's one of the most popular weapons, just by and large, in the Monster Hunter community. Just sheer number wise, like a lot of people stick with longsword because, like as you said, high skill ceiling, but it's very like it's pretty easy to use on a basic level.
It's easy to be 80% effective on it, where other weapons might have a more like gradual ramp in terms of like how good are you at the game versus how much damage you deal. I did see that like when the second part of the demo came out, and people were like, and this is like meta, super Monster Hunter like experts were like timing like the average clear rate for the different weapons. If I remember right, Longsword did like lap the competition because apparently it just has really high potential damage output. So it's got that going for it. If I remember right, Bow was last.
Oh yeah, never touch bow.
James,
Bow is more of a utility weapon, I feel, in terms of like wearing out monsters' stamina, things like that.
James,
Having never played it.
For Rise, did you do multiple weapons, or or did you have like a main weapon as you were like going through the review for it?
I mostly focused on switch axe when I was going through the review, and then I went to different weapon types. Every time I play a new Monster Hunter, I try to go with a different weapon for the main story.
Mhm.
The exception was with Iceborne. I just stuck with Greatsword because I was like, I need to finish the content as quickly as possible for the review.
Yeah, and Iceborne is one hell of a game content-wise.
Yeah, for perspective, for folks that have played Iceborne, I hit MR 100 before I wrote my review.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, that's the initial thoughts on Rise for obviously me and George. James, that was a fantastic review, up both written and video wise. I can't wait to go back and play more.
We have a YouTube channel. It's RPG Site Net. You should visit and give James's review a watch.
It is a very good review as well.
He got a new mic just for it. Well, obviously he's gonna has more bigger plans for this mic.
I'm using the new mic right now.
So sounds great.
So with that, I think that covers everything in terms of been playing, and we'll probably obviously talk about Monster Hunter over the next couple of weeks as you guys work through it. I want to hear anecdotes about your guys' hunts together. We do also have a Discord channel where we do have a Discord server where we do have a Monster Hunter channel. So go ahead and join that. You can hit that link at the top of the RPG Site Net homepage if you want to play Monster Hunter with other like-minded people. And with that said and squared away, let's move on to news. Is that where we're at?
Yeah,
News.
let's do it.
All right. So not a lot of big heavy hitters, but a lot of interesting little things. This one is actually ties into another feature that Adam actually, well, I had a lot of contributors. Adam contributed, and then Josh followed up with a new take on it. I am talking about the reports that the PlayStation 3, PlayStation P, and PlayStation Vita network stores will be taken offline this summer. This was originally reported on The Gamer.
PlayStation P?
The Gamer.
PlayStation P?
Portable.
PlayStation P is kind of funny.
So the according to this report from The Gamer, the PSP and PS3 stores will be closed on July 2nd, and a Vita store will be closed on August 27th. Of course, the reason why this is kind of shocking is that there are a lot of games that are only available on those stores that you cannot get or even play on PlayStation 4 or 5. So when we saw this news, we basically, for our own sake, I mean, I'm speaking collectively here, like what games are we interested in that we want to make sure we have access to before, if this comes to pass and it ends up being true?
I think at this point it's pretty clear it's going to happen for one main thing. So even though the old PlayStation web store was supposed to been taken down months ago, it's been accessible if you use the specific link. So you could still buy PS3 and PSP and Vita and PlayStation 1 games on the web store. Well, yesterday or the day before, one of those 2 days, if you try and go to any of those links to the old web store that worked before, they no longer work. So there's some more smoke.
So is the only way to access those stores through those consoles then?
Yes, and for the PS3, that is an exercise in...
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
what about
the PS3 web... the PlayStation Portable's web store is actually... Well, not web store. Its actual store has been down for years at this point. You could still use the download list, but you had to buy PSP games on either the PlayStation 3 or PlayStation Vita stores.
Yeah, this is
So-
go for it.
Go ahead. You first.
I was just gonna say that once I heard about this, I immediately went to go download all the Astra's Wrath and Drakengard 3 ones for starters. And I navigated through the PS3 store just recently. It is so horrendous these days. It takes a long time to boot up and get navigating the interfaces. Remember, it's now in line with how it is on PS4, but the performance of it on PS3 is so laggy and unresponsive. The only upside of it is hey, you can use PayPal now. On the old PS Store design, you couldn't use PayPal. You only have to do
The crashes.
Yeah. The crashes. Yeah. And the interesting thing is you can still access the old PS3 store through certain like downloadable content, like hot links on id games. Like for Asura's Wrath, there's this downloadable content like like option on the main menu, and when you click that, it'll actually all boot up like the old PS3 store, not the launch date PS3, but the more modernized one. So I was able to get that content and like see that UI like one more time. So I was like, oh, interesting. But the quirk with it is you can't use PayPal. You have to only use PSN cards or credit card to pay for the content. So that was a weird thing. But for the Drakengard one, you could still do that old PS store, but it wouldn't accept my credit card at that point. So I had to go buy it on the modern, the one that they have now. So it's all over the place. And as Brian was talking about earlier, the Adam was the one who initiated the idea of like, hey, we should let people know like what are like the exclusives are on these storefronts as like one last chance, like, you know, buy them, purchase them legally instead of like resorting to piracy. But obviously this is going to open the door to piracy, because now like it's justified, right? As
Yeah, you might not have a choice.
Yeah,
Literally.
yeah. So
I think not to get.
Sorry.
This is just going to be an impassioned rant for a second, but
yeah, go for it.
it's such a to see. So I'm so annoyed by it that I literally can't start off well. But not to be hyperbolic, I think it's like disgusting. I think it is so crap of Sony. I think the way that they constantly do these things, where they're just they're anti-consumer in a lot of ways. Like they were doing so well for the PS4. They had this amazing underdog story from the PS3, and like, yeah, let's get back on top. And the PS4, it's like, okay, yeah, they're doing pretty well. Like, but they suck with backwards compatibility and they suck with legacy stuff. Like, they'll sell it back to you, but you won't be able to download it otherwise. And then with the PS5 coming out, they're just like, you know what? You ever want to play that Ratchet and Clank game again? Go buy a really expensive disc. Otherwise, you're screwed. You want to play Infamous again? Good luck. Like, all these games, I think maybe I'm a little bit sulky about it because I got rid of my PS3 collection a long time ago. And now I'm like, oh my god, what have I done?
Yeah, the only way you can access these games is like whatever the PlayStation Now library has. I don't know if you can even access the PlayStation Now, like play the PlayStation Now games on PS5. I'm not sure about that. You can on PS4, but you know, PlayStation Now is lacking in a lot of ways. Library,
it's shit. It's to, like, stream only, and you guys know my internet can't handle that.
Yeah,
so I can't use it.
And they're also like when you're streaming, sometimes there'll be like a stream queue, like, hey, there's too many people like accessing this thing right now on PlayStation Now, so you're like added to this virtual queue, and then when it's your turn, you're good to go. Yeah, it's not great what their options are. We do have an article on the site now that like catalogs RPGs that are both available on PlayStation 3, PlayStation Portable, PlayStation Vita, as a last chance to buy them legally. And then after Adam did a lot of the base work on the English front, like me and Kite and Adam added to it as well. We in comparison to the English language stores on both the US and Europe, like the Japanese PSN is like a real gold mine of a lot of obscure RPGs that are still there. So like it took a bit to get to catalog them all, but we have like a good bulk of it now on the site. Unfortunately, as James mentioned earlier, we used to have hot link URLs that link them to them directly, just to easily to purchase. But now people have to go on the native storefronts on PS3, like Japanese stores on Japanese accounts and whatnot. And now
I was wondering about that because like you had for some of these Japanese games, like you had links directly to them. Like if you want to get this in your library, go here. And now you can't easily, like there's more steps involved.
Yeah, now you have to if you don't have a Japanese keyboard or access to that, you have to I imagine have to copy and paste things from the article into the search bar on the PlayStation Store. Or I guess I don't exactly know.
No, it's worse than that. I mean,
you have to go on a PS3 or a Vita, and for some PSP games, for example, you have to go on a PS3 and use the search through the PS3's store in order to get a PSP game, because there is no way to do it through the web store anymore. You have to do it through a PS3 or a Vita, and some Vita games, some PSP games aren't supported on Vita officially, so you have to
But
go that route.
is there a way for like, since the PS3 has an internet browser, like wouldn't you be able to like go to our article on the through the PS3 browser and then copy and paste it?
I don't know if that works that way.
Yeah,
And first off, I don't even know if RPG Site would even load on the PS3 browser. That's that old. So
yeah, that's true. Have you found a way, Adam, to get around this now?
Okay, so this is something I've kind of been like worried about. Worried's maybe a strong word, but for a while, like it was inevitable that this, like, I think the store was going to shut down, and it was kind of going to depend on what Sony was going to do about it or whatever.
Right.
But so I've always kind of known I was going to probably have to go through the store and buy a bunch of stuff that I want to be able to play at some point in the future, because it's a lot easier to, you know, buy a $7 digital game on PS3 than like to buy a disc. I know you can always pirate it, but like if you want like a legit copy, like put the effort in to buy it, that it was there, but unfortunately never was brought forward to PS4 or now PS5. But like, so I went through the store once this report came out, and I was adding a bunch of Japanese games I wanted to play. And so, like, for example, some of the games that I wanted to buy, because I haven't played them yet and I want to someday, are Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2. They have PlayStation 1 versions, ports on PlayStation 3. They were never localized. So the thing is when you're going to the Japanese store, which you have to have a Japanese account, first of all, which takes some time to set up. I don't know any Japanese at all. I know like yes and no, and that's about it. So I go to our article, look up Shin Megami Tensei, and like, okay, here's how you write it in kanji. But the problem is you can't on the PS3 write in kanji. You have to write it in hiragana, and then it sort of like populates in kanji. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like it gives you the drop downs, and like I don't know how to write Shin Megami Tensei in hiragana. So I had to like Google like Shin Megami Tensei in hiragana and like find some like wiki questions page, like how do you type this in hiragana? I don't know. And like here you go. And so like, and I don't know what the characters are. Like, okay, so that character, and I'll let me look for it. Oh, there it is. Click it. And so I did that for some games. Like imagine like a monkey like trying to navigate a language he doesn't understand. Like me. And then also there's sometimes I just like literally went to like the search bar and like, all right, search. Like, oh, I see PS1. That's in English letters. I can read that, and I just click that. Like, okay, here are all the PS1 games. There's literally like 500 of them or something like that. Like, let me just scroll down and just see the icons and see which ones I want to get. And I ended up spending like $200 or something like that on just digital games, but it's a process, especially if you don't know Japanese like me. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, this
I will say that where to start with this?
My feelings exactly.
First off, if this is the end of the storefront, where the fuck is Sony? And they should confirm this. It seems likely that this is the end. And if that's the case, and they're just saying nothing as they're pulling access to the easy way for people to buy these old games for their platforms, and they're just continuing to along like on the shutdown without letting people know what the fuck.
I think Nintendo had I think it's also unfortunate that Nintendo, like the virtual console, doesn't work on Switch. I would love for it to work on Switch, but it just didn't.
There's also precedent. Yeah, Nintendo has done this as well. Like,
but the thing with Nintendo is they gave like a year's of notice. Like, all right, we are going to be shutting down virtual console. I forget exactly the timing, but it was like within a year you can no longer add money, and then like within half a year after that you can no longer make downloads. And so like they still shut it down.
It was like you can no longer make purchases. You can still technically download.
Oh right. So they stopped adding. You couldn't add money first, so you had to like you were stuck with the money you had in your account, and then later like you had to spend it before a certain date, and then it was shut down. But like at least they gave plenty of like head time to be like, all right, make sure you add money, within the next several months, and then after that you still have several more months to make purchases. And like Sony has said nothing. So
it's
why
like,
are they closing the
I
store?
keep thinking back to that infamous Jim Ryan quote of who wants to play these old games. And I know it's one person in Sony hierarchy, and that was years ago. But the fact that all the other major like Sony like executives that were there, like Sean Layden, have left. The fact that he's the one that's left over, that he's the top honcho there, and that there's been nothing to say that, well, nothing to show that what he said back then isn't what is, if not policy, is what's internally happening inside Sony. It's like PlayStation next to Nintendo is the one platform holder that has the largest legacy.
Mhm.
And it is disgusting that they don't respect it as much as they should.
Yep.
Nintendo still doesn't respect their legacy as much as they should, I'd say, but it's like, and I keep saying this,
you've done a
podcast after
bad job when
podcast.
you can bring up Nintendo and be like, at least Nintendo did this. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's like, let me put it this way. I keep saying this. I keep coming back to this. If I didn't need to have a PlayStation 5, I would not want to give Sony money for it. If there wasn't exclusives, if there weren't games I know that I'm going to have to play on PlayStation 5, and this isn't even just like I want to play, but I mean for my job here, for like covering games. If there weren't going to be PS5 games that I knew that I'd need to cover or want to cover, stuff like that, I don't think I would have bought a PlayStation 5. Because I'm looking at what Sony, well, no, I'm looking at what Sony's doing, and then I look at what Microsoft is doing with regards to their legacy. Microsoft, yeah, they shut down the original like OG Xbox Live, but the 360 Xbox Live is still around. It's all part of the same network. You can buy original Xbox games digitally. You can buy 360 games digitally. They patched in backwards compatibility for the Xbox One.
I don't think my sorry to interrupt, but I don't think my brother has bought an Xbox Series yet, but I know he recently got Knights of the Old Republic on original Xbox, and he's playing that on an Xbox One. Like,
yeah,
that's
it's
cool
like,
that you can do that.
It's like, if I were to respect any of the platform holders, if I were to like expect any of the platform holders to actually respect my purchases going forward, it would be Microsoft. Because they're the only ones that are showing that they are committed to keeping your library going forward.
It's like smart delivery as well. Like that Avengers showed it perfect. It's a shit show on PlayStation, on Xbox.
It's like, on PlayStation. It's like, yeah, PlayStation 4 is playable now, but is it going to be playable on PlayStation 6? Should I buy any should I buy any PlayStation games now, expecting to be able to play them on my console in like another 10 years from now? I don't think so. It's
See,
just,
for me as well, like the reason why it hits me hard is that my PS3 is a slim one, but it doesn't work very well. And like now in my head, I'm thinking, okay, like am I gonna have to buy a new PS3 and all of the games I want in case I ever want to play them again? Like, am I gonna have to start?
One thing I'll say is, thank God that PS3 emulation is getting to the point where it's actually usable. Like, you can play a lot of these PlayStation 3 exclusives, and like every day they get better. Like just the other day, I was playing Motorstorm Pacific Rift in 4K 60. Like this is why preservation is so important. This is why emulation is so important. But the fact of the matter is that these fans shouldn't be the ones that are tasked with preserving these games. If you're a platform holder, you should at least be doing the bare minimum to make sure that people can have access to their games going forward.
Yeah.
For some reason, the way I think of it is I think of like specific examples. Like, for instance, tying it back to the feature that Adam, Josh, and Kite and so many other people contributed to. Well, the way that we set that up was it was trying to be like games that you cannot find anywhere else. So if it has like a Steam port or a remaster, it still sucks that you have to be like, oh, you already paid money for this, or you not paid money for it. Like you have to like this one's no longer on the table. Like one of the examples on there is Persona 4. So obviously Persona 4 Golden is now on Steam. But like I feel like that you shouldn't just say like, oh well, now Persona 4 digital on PlayStation networks on that store that's coming down is no longer like you have to have the new version. Like to me, that's just there's something about that where it's just like I think both those games should exist so that you can compare, so that you can like see the progression, so that it's just like almost a part of history, as hokey as that sounds, where you have like these two different versions of the same project, of the same product. But now it's just kind of like, oh, Persona 4, the original version, it has a different opening and a different cadence, and it plays a little bit different, and different English voice actors. You can only play that if you have the disc.
Yeah.
Like,
and here's a good example. So I've been playing through the Final Fantasy series this year. I came to the conclusion that I think the best version of the original Final Fantasy 1 to play is Final Fantasy Origins. You could buy it on the PlayStation's web store for PS3. You can't do that anymore. And once the PS3 store goes bye-bye for good, you're going to have to get a disc in order to play it or pirate it.
Okay, I guess I'll have to apologize to the entire world, because last weekend was, before all this news came out. Last weekend was the point where it's like, you know what, I want to go revisit my PlayStation TV. Got that all set up, updated and everything. And then I guess, once Sony realized, oh, someone's downloading Muramasa Rebirth DLC, like we got to shut it down. What are we doing?
I mean, to take Brian's example, only to even just step back a little bit, there are so many games that you can buy and play on a PS3 that are not available anywhere else, even like in a new form. Yeah. Like even like classics like Chrono Cross or Vagrant Story, those never got ported, they never got remastered. Obviously you can pirate them. Like that's what people will have to do. But like if you wanted to, like, hey, let's buy these games from Square Enix, from Sony, and play them on a machine where they play fine, you can do that. And it's like they're classics. But now they're not going to be. If the shutdown goes through, your only options are to find a disc or pirate it, and it's just like that shouldn't be the case.
And that also brings into like a question, like, will you even be able to like get updates for these games if you get them on disc, like moving forard as well? Like if you
because DLC updates.
Yeah, if you insert them, it's like, will there be a server that still have these updates that you can like at least download? If not, then for some instances, like for example, like. Most recently, Balan Wonderworld had this whole thing with the final boss fight, where if you were playing that game without the day one update, that is absolutely seizure-inducing because of the way that like effects go on in that final boss fight of Balan Wonderworld. Now, like imagine if you play that game and you weren't able to get that day one update, you're literally playing at that game that could like give you a severe
dangerous.
Yeah, it's dangerous, Now, for some of these, I'm not saying that like some of these like releases on PS3 have that same thing without the day one like an update. But imagine a world where if you wanted to play Balan Wonderworld, but you can no longer get that update that would like save your life. What happens? That's crazy.
Sorry, I'll just out of context. So imagine a world where you want to play Balan Wonderworld.
Yeah, I laughed at that too. It wasn't the rest of it.
I'm tripping over that.
I think we found the title for the post.
But it's just very crazy to think about. Like this is the digital future now. It's
I don't want to get like philosophical, but it almost seems like you could have a conversation about like this is kind of how we treat games media. It's like disposable. Like if you haven't played it within 5 years, you've missed it. You've missed your chance, which obviously is not the case. But some people seem to like, maybe they don't internalize it, but they end up, operating that way without realizing it. And I know I sometimes do that, where it's like, do I play this new game that comes out, or do I play this one game that I was interested in? Like for instance, Jedi Fallen Order. Like I haven't played it yet. My window hasn't expired. That game is not that old. It's 2 years old. But it's just like there's this mindset thing where it's just like when you take the older. When you don't respect the legacy like that, all of a sudden you're kind of pushing in that direction where it's just like games it's the zeitgeist or bust. You're there at launch or the year or the year after, or you missed your chance, which you might think that's ludicrous. It is ludicrous. That's why we should keep these old games around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To indulge a little bit into the like niche RPG side of things here, it was cool. It sucks that that's past tense now, or will be. It was cool just what kind of things you could find on like PSN. Like I didn't realize until I was starting to go through this. Like I can get the PCE engine version of Ys 4, The Dawn of Ys. Like I don't have a TurboGrafx or a PCE, right? And like that's a game I've always been interested in. It's a classic old Japanese only game. But if you have a PS3, and a lot of people have PS3s, you can buy that and play it. Like you don't need a Japanese PlayStation engine console with a disc. You can just buy it and play it. And it sucks that that's sort of you won't be able to do that for much longer. It sounds like, you know. So
Yeah.
Even stuff like, to go stupid basic, I won't hop on this forever, but like there are PlayStation exclusives that are PSN store exclusive as well, like Fat Princess. I know it's sort
Tokyo
of a silly little
Jungle.
game. I love that. Tokyo Jungle, Infamous First Blood, Ratchet and Clank Quest for Booty. Like these are all games. Like,
Actually, Quest for Booty did get a disc release.
Oh, in Europe. Yeah. Well, I have that somewhere, but like just in general, like that's not available for everyone. And personally, I'm a massive Sony fanboy. I'll admit that. I've always been able to admit that. But like, I grew up with these games. The PS3 is my sort of nostalgia, and like to potentially see a world where I can't play Pain, which isn't a good game, but like means a lot to me. You know, that sucks. It hurts. Genuinely.
That's actually a good point. Just speaking generally, we live in an age now where smaller budget games, indies, some AA games, some remasters even, they just get digital releases. That's the world we live in. So if we're having the same conversation 15 years from now, we won't even be able to say pirate it or get the disc. That second part will no longer be valid. Like that's just bad.
There are a few games on there that never did get discs. As like, there's not a lot of them.
Legacysta,
Legacysta is one.
Battle Princess of Arcadia's. I just have the list up right now for me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Nobby Boy.
Brandish, the Dark Revenant.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get that. You have to get that digitally if you want to play it in English. So,
yeah, it's
good game.
It's just one of those things. Like I guess, like to tie a bow on this whole conversation that we really harp on. Like I just think that Sony has an obligation to just keep these storefronts going like in perpetuity for as much as that word is right now, like ideally forever. Because there's just like I imagine like when they what kind of like how does this damage like partner relations as well for some companies? Like obviously they're not like buying things off there right now, but just like moving forward, like they're like some of these companies like, hey, this is the only release of this game. This is the only way you can play it right now. We haven't re-released it. Like just how much like that damages partner relations in general with internally with Sony as well. It's so weird to like just finally see these words like come up, like here's the day, here's reckoning day, here's the apocalypse for these stores. Like now it's finally come to pass. It's just like you don't want to see it. It hurts to see. It feels like there's so many games that are now at the other side that have been digital only in that era of PS3, PSP, and PS Vita. That like just Sony it just feels like Sony should have a moral obligation to keep these stores running in perpetuity because so many of these releases, just RPGs alone, but obviously we only covered one genre for every genre of game.
Yeah.
It's
such a downer, but it's just like it's important.
You understand why it makes sense in the context of a capitalist society. You understand that, but in terms of like preservation, this is such a huge blow. Yeah,
I'm glad we're also impassioned though. Like obviously, it's gonna be like whatever piece of news is next. Like, and this game got released there, like whatever. Like, I'm glad that we're having the conversation of like that it sucks and that we can recognize it sucks. Like, that's nice at least, because if I talk to most people, they're like, okay, cool, like, you play new games now anyway. It's not about that. It's about like wanting to play older games and that chance like being taken away.
But look to all the people out there, it's like whatever. Look, last weekend before any of this news hit, I just wanted to replay Muramasa Rebirth, and then just to think in a few months I will no longer have that option if I get that like feeling again. And it's like, oh, I just want to go replay this game. It's like, oh, it's no longer here. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like not only that, but like when you were playing Muramasa Rebirth, you were streaming it in our Discord channel. I was watching. I was kind of commenting about how I had played it on Vita. I had played not the Rebirth or I don't remember, but basically I was comparing my experience with his and what I remembered from the game and what I didn't. You had the new DLC that I never played, and we had a conversation about it. And it's just like you're not just losing those games; you're losing like all these experience tethered to them. Or you have a new player playing alongside someone who played it years ago but has a foggy memory, or someone revisiting a game they're nostalgic for and they want to, they just have the opportunity to play it again. Like those are the other things you're losing tangentially.
Yeah,
so.
So yeah, I guess this is
It
like a
sucks.
big heads up. It's a big heads up. Like, whenever Sony decides to report on this, if this report is true, which is looking likely that it's true, like, just here's a heads up. Like, every PS3, PSP, PS Vita game like that you wanted to get, like, this is the time, before you regret it forever. These games are lost in the void because on a whim, Sony just wanted it to just let go.
Yeah, I guess the best thing we can hope for is that we end up looking like clowns, and Sony says that's not happening. But like, I guess
yeah.
we will take that on the chin. If that ends up being how this turns out.
We would gladly we want to be wrong that this report is false. We want to be wrong, but if it's true, and it's likely to be true, go get them. Go get them.
So yep. So stated plainly, we have a feature up on the site. I believe it is the top banner. Like if you go to our homepage, it's the biggest icon. It's a list of all the RPGs and RPG-like games on that service that you should get now if you're interested while you have the chance. So moving on. This isn't quite like the whiplash that I thought it would be, because here's another thing that's a bit more. It's not quite nearly as far-reaching, but we talked about this game on previous podcasts. But the long in development / speculated / rumored Final Fantasy XI mobile port / remake, which is Square Enix's partnership with Nexon, has been officially canned. So I remember talking about this game, saying like, hey, if this happens and ends up looking pretty good, I could see myself using this as my gateway to Final Fantasy XI. No longer the case. So obviously Final Fantasy XI is still available on PC in its original form. Its console ports have shut down several years ago. But the mobile port's no longer happening.
It's still getting expansions on PC as well. It's still getting supported. It's still up. So, I mean, I guess I don't know. I didn't have like the highest hopes for this project because Nexon was helming it, and Nexon is very, very infamous in the mobile gacha RPG space. Of like, they kind of just the way their monetization structure and philosophy doesn't resonate well with players of those spaces. They're very keen on squeezing their player base dry, and the way they structure games, like, hey, it's pay to win. Nexon is just, and then Nexon is also good about this, like having a game up for several months and then just shutting it down if it doesn't like make them money, essentially. So,
some people might make a similar argument where it's just like, why play this if you can play 14? But like, people should have the option to compare them. Like, and yeah, you might end up thinking like, okay, 11 is dated and 14 is better in every way. Like, that might be your opinion. I don't know if that's true. But just you can't just take like some majority opinion and say, oh, all right, so this game is no longer worth it. But luckily, obviously, Square Enix has kept that Final Fantasy XI on board, and they seem to be supporting it really well. So luckily, there's not a ton of parallels that you can draw between this conversation and the last one. But I was interested in this mobile port, kind of as a morbid's not the right word, but kind of like as an odd curiosity. Like that's interesting, refashioning the game in this style. Like I want to see how that turns out. Turns out it doesn't happen. So I'm bummed.
Yeah.
Downer episode today, guys.
All right,
Hey,
let's move on. How about this? SaGa Frontier Remastered. So obviously this was announced. I don't remember the announcement date. Adam, chime in if you want. But we got a bunch of new details from it. Yeah. So we already knew that they were adding the Fuse storyline, that they were kind of touching up some of the storylines of the different other characters that had gaps or incomplete development when it had to be originally released. So we already knew some of the general details, but Square Enix has now shared a bunch of new screenshots, new information. Adam, I guess I don't know specifically like what here is the highlight that I should call out.
Well, so SaGa Frontier is a PlayStation 1 RPG, and I have not played it, but as I understand it, it was unfinished in places. So they are remastering it, which that alone isn't maybe too much of a surprise after they re-released Romancing Saga 2 and 3, so this would be the next game. But they're also taking this opportunity to add new content, to finish what was sort of gaps before, and also add several quality of life features. So first of all, there's a New Game Plus mode. So, like a couple of other Saga games, this game has 8 different protagonists. And while you pick one to go through their storyline, as I understand it, you can recruit some of the others into your team.
Yes.
And so the New Game Plus option is kind of nice for people who want to play not just one storyline, but multiple storylines. So let's just say you pick a character first time through, you go through the storyline, you like it, and now you want to pick a different character. The characters that you had before, they'll already be like powered up, so you can kind of replay it more quickly. So that's a nice option.
The odd thing about this too is like it's encouraged, especially with the new content SaGa Frontier Remastered, because Fuse's storyline in particular incorporates events from like every other scenario. So if you want to complete Fuse's storyline, you have to go complete everyone else's to get his full storyline.
Yep. It seems like there are the 7 storylines, and then there's Fuse's, which is the new one, and it seems like there's like a flag where if you've completed, let's just say, Acellus's story, and then you play Fuse's story, the Acellus component of it is like different or added. It's not clear yet because that's new, but his storyline seems to be sort of a kind of a combination mixture of the other one, so it sort of makes sense to do his last. So in terms of content, that's what that's what the new remaster offers. But there's also things like there's now a turbo mode in battle, 2 times and 3 times turbo mode.
Always
Sorry?
Always appreciated.
We both said always good. Like that's never a big
idea. There's other things like these maps have like, I think they're pre-rendered backgrounds, and sometimes when you have pre-rendered backgrounds, maybe it's not obvious where you need to go. So there's a new option where it shows like here are the arrows pointing at that where the scene transitions are, and it's like a small thing, but you can do that. One actually big addition that they made to this game, and again I haven't played it, but I know what this means having played other Saga games, is that you can escape from battle. In some Saga games you can't. When you get to a battle, you have to fight it. But also that means when you escape from battle, the battle rank will not go up. And that is pretty big for Saga games, because
if
you play Saga games, you understand.
Yeah, it basically in most Saga games, maybe all of them, as you do battles, there's like a counter that kind of determines like as you do more battles, the overall difficulty for encounters rises. So
in Romancing Saga 3, if you run away from battles, your battle counter still goes up. And this is really exaggerated, but like if you were to run away from like 200 battles or something like that, then you start running into enemies that you are way tougher than they should be, because the game is assuming, oh, you fought 200 battles, you should be good by now, but you ran away. So you if you are like extreme about it, I guess you can sort of handicap yourself. But honestly, I think the game does a pretty good job. But yeah, you can run away from battle now. You couldn't do that before. It kind of sounds weird in a vacuum, but that's a big addition.
Yes, that's very big. One of the easiest modern comparisons that you probably point to, Adam, also is The Last Remnant, where if you grinded The Last Remnant, you're screwing yourself over later in the game, because fights will be so tough that it's going to be
specifically so if you grind against weak enemies, because you're like, oh, you've had all these opportunities to gain new skills, but you haven't really gained many because you're grinding against like little bugs. Like so we'll throw these really tough enemies at you.
Yep. So
was that
purposeful? Say that again, George.
Was that like a purposeful choice? Like, haha, you grinded, or was it like an accidental like?
I think it's more of a. You see this sort of design in a few games, also like often in Western games, and you can go into like a tangent about like how there's some Saga inspiration from that, about how they don't want to have like fixed, like you're in this region of the world, everything is this strong. It's more of a sliding scale. And you see like sometimes Bethesda does that in like their online games with like, what do they call that? It's on the tip of my tongue. But
maybe a better example is just Final Fantasy VIII. Like if you play Final Fantasy VIII and level up normally, but like you're drawing and you're junctioning, like you just aren't engaging with that system, it's going to become harder and harder to like fight enemies in that game, which is why I think some people, when they play Final Fantasy VIII for the first time, kind of struggle with it, because they don't really understand junctioning, and that's key, but the game sort of assumes that you do. But on the flip side, Final Fantasy VIII, if you do understand how that system leveling works, you can totally break it by basically junctioning and not leveling. But it's a similar broad concept of like the world is tracking along with you in terms of the strength of enemies as you fight through it.
Yeah, Final Fantasy is like even also like one of the weird ones where if you like understand junctioning, you can beat the entire game without leveling it up once.
Yep, level 7.
Hell yeah!
The idea that I was thinking of, just so I don't sound like an idiot, was one Tamriel, where Elder Scrolls Online implemented like a wide-scale level scaling thing, where basically the goal is to always keep enemies like as on par with the player, so you never just have trash that you're just mowing through. And some people like that, and some people absolutely abhor it. And when I've played Last Remnant and Saga Scarlet Grace, I'm not going to say they're similar, but you can kind of feel like the inspiration behind the design is similar in terms of trying to always keep the player on a smooth like difficulty curve.
Some other additions to this remaster are just kind of fun ones. Like there's a library mode where you can look at art and listen to music from the game, which, the art from Tomomi is really great. Music from Kenji Ito is really great. So you can do that. There's also a scenario chart, which Saga games oftentimes, again, I haven't played this one, but they leave it up to the player oftentimes to kind of figure out what to do next or what's going on. Not like completely. They'll give you like, you need to find this, but they don't necessarily like point you and guide you like you need to go exactly to this person here. So sometimes it maybe felt a little aimless if you didn't know exactly what you needed to do. And now they're adding a scenario chart, which at least something you can like pull up in the menu and like, what was I supposed to be doing right now, sort of thing. So that's nice.
And this game comes out next month, in only a couple of weeks, honestly, because we're pretty much at the end of March. So not too long away.
April 15.
So like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So a few other smaller news bits from the week. This one's kind of an interesting thing we can talk about. The official Tales of YouTube channel for the series, like Tales of Symphonia, Tales of Vesperia, all those, throughout this year since December, which marked the 25th anniversary of Tales of Fantasia, they've been doing like a bunch of anniversary type celebrations in terms of art and music and characters. And what they did last week was they went through basically the whole sales history, ranked it globally, and then even showed the breakdown by region. So this is always just kind of interesting if you're a numbers nerd, if you have like a favorite entry and you want to see how well it ranked. So we copied the list. A Japanese publication called Games Talk kind of collated all the information provided in the video, which we also linked in our post about it. The best selling Tales of game is Tales of Symphonia, which maybe isn't a surprise, but largely carried from its popularity in North America. Tales of Vesperia, it falls in second. And in third place is Tales of Destiny, largely carried by its popularity in Japan. And then obviously we've got more of the breakdowns. You can see what filtered out the top 10 of each list. So I don't know. Just do we have any comments about any like surprises here, or does it kind of fall into what we expected?
George, you're killing the Tales of series. Europe, the best-selling Tales game in Europe is Tales of Astria. What the fuck, George?
Is that the best one or the worst one?
It's so bad.
In my opinion, it's the worst one.
I don't know. I don't know.
Some people
Tales,
have
but
soft
this
spot
is-
for it, but I don't like it.
So I
What's
kind of
that about?
cheekily called this out on our social page, but not because like I have like this, curling rage into Styria, but just because it's an unexpected result and it was so close. It beat Tales of Symphonia by 1,000 units. And I actually kind of asked, inadvertently asked, why did this one end up overperforming in Europe? But it was the first that had a native PC port. Obviously, other games came to PC later. And then apparently, I can't substantiate this, but I saw some murmurs saying that it had much better support for European languages, tech support. So and then they just marketed it better in general. So it's like, all right, with all those things considered, it's maybe not a surprise that Zestiria took the top slot in Europe. But I will say, just on the game itself, when I was originally playing that, it tells its story so poorly that I almost felt dumber. Like, can I not follow a narrative anymore? Does my brain just not work? Because it
Do you
feels
remember
kinda
all
like
those encounters with Zavid? And it's like, why are they fighting? Like, what are they doing? Why are we going here?
This might seem like a weird comparison, but in hindsight, it kind of reminds me of Final Fantasy 15 in a way, where it's like they had these ideas, they maybe had a framework in place, they had like a through line imagined at some point, but then like when it came to put pen to paper, or put graphics and models to engine or whatever you want to call it, they just like could only do so much. So there's gaps. The order is weird. Some of it's like reconfigured in a way that no longer is very clear. And it's interesting because this game is tied to, they're not directly related, but they are, well, maybe they are kind of directly related, but Berseria is
Yeah,
like
it's
a
directly related.
hundreds of years prequel, if I
Mhm.
remember right.
Mhm.
And it almost kind of, that game in general on its own is much better told and it's much more clear and a better game, I think. But then it almost kind of like retroactively makes Asteria better because it kind of gives you like, oh, some of these things that were just kind of like nebulous and vague and weird in Asteria, now we've kind of given some context to through Berseria. So it kind of like props up its
Like, okay, to put it into
Asteria.
perspective, Tales of Asteria, the game itself, is like so bad that it's largely considered that the Tales of Asteria, the anime adaptation, is vastly better than it.
It's
Anime
also
table.
it also seems to be the last thing that Baba worked on before he kind of
Hmm.
Yeah,
disappeared.
Hideo Baba. Yeah, it's okay. Like, not to point just the fingers at Europe. Like Tales of Asteria
Sorry,
ranked
Europe.
as third on North America, and it sold 600,000 units in North America. So it's still ranked well in North America. So we're still fucking up too, to be honest.
It is
So-
interesting though that the Japanese Asia ranking has Destiny, Destiny 2, and Eternia. And
Hell
then like
yeah,
none
dude.
of those show up on the North America.
Japanese.
And then North America also has the sequel to Symphonia, which I also don't think is very good, Knights of Ratatosk or Dawn of the New World, depending on your language. And it's kind of like, gee, I think it just kind of presumably rode the coattails of
Just-
much better regarded Symphonia.
I guess Japan just has way better taste in tales of just than any other region. That's what I got from the list. I'm glad
I looked
that
at the list and I found it funny that they listed Tales of Heart as number 10 for North America when we only got Tales of Heart R.
I don't think that game's very good either.
yeah,
I reviewed it, gave it a 5. Sorry.
I'm glad though that Japan has decided that Tales of Eternia pretty good.
It is good.
It is good.
Eternia is good.
Well, obviously, though, like the undertone of these lists is that like some of these games never made it to North America or never made it to Europe, or they only did in a very specific circumstance on a limited release. So like the global and the Japanese ranking are kind of like stacked against each other inherently a bit. Obviously, it seems like from like Zestiria on, we're kind of out of that paradigm of the series. I say that as the series has kind of been dormant since 2016 or so with Berseria. Obviously, we finally got the Arise news earlier this year, and they with the promise of more coming early this year. So we
It was
should be
more of a
seeing more of
promise
that
of
with.
news than actual news. But
All right,
maybe that's
okay.
something.
Thought experiment time. Tales of Arise. Where does it rank in Japan, North America, and Europe? Like, does it make a top 10?
Well, here's the thing.
I think if it delivers, it'll easily make it into the top 10 globally.
Go ahead, Adam.
So like Symphonia was by far the most successful game in the United States, and it tops the worldwide list too, right? Like we kind of
Yes.
named it, yeah. Obviously being a bigger market than Japan, like that game just had like a perfect launch, window and region, like a Japanese RPG on the GameCube that like didn't really have many of them at that time. So it was,
Yeah, it had the Nintendo
lightning in a
marketing
bottle,
behind it.
did really well. I think it was like Nintendo published, if not like Nintendo highly marketed it, right? And so that's also one reason why Symphonia 2 did so well here, is because people just wanted another Symphonia, even if it is kind of weird. Now,
By the way,
one thing I think is
you mentioned, I don't want to like correct you, but you mentioned that North America, like bigger market. Actually, one thing that was kind of interesting about this list is that the top 3 in Japan, Destiny, Fantasian, and Eternia, all broke 1 million. The top 3 in North America are 900,000, 800,000, 600,000. So still very much a Japanese centric series in terms of sales strength, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, none of the best-selling Tales games in Europe ever broke 500,000. They're all in the 400,000 range.
Yeah.
481,
But also, what I was one thing I was getting at that's maybe interesting about the Japanese market as a whole is that neither Zestiria nor Berseria broke into the top 10. And like, I'm not like
recent games,
surprised
right?
yeah, I'm not surprised maybe that they're not like top 5 because things like Destiny are like treasured in Japan. So like it's not going to beat that. But like, maybe being PlayStation games instead of like if there was a Tales game on Switch, maybe that would do better. Where's Vesperia on the list for Japan? I assume that includes
It's a
the remake.
fifth
Yeah.
place. Yeah.
But like, I guess being PlayStation games, console games in Japan, maybe they just aren't as popular now as they were in the PlayStation 1 days, or they're, I was like, I'm a little bit surprised that neither of them could even be as good enough for 10th place.
So with you saying that, my guess would be that I feel like Tales of Arise, especially if it still has like big presence with like Microsoft. I don't know if they got like the marketing or not, but they obviously that's where it was originally announced before it showed up in Tokyo Game Show, was the Microsoft E3 stage. I feel like Arise should pretty handedly top the North American and European list, at least the North American, if I had to pick one of those two. But then, like, you bring up all the stuff out of Japan, I'm like, how high does it go up that list? Especially if it's not got any mobile presence or Switch presence. Maybe it just cracks in there in the top 10 barely, but it's hard to say. Like, I'm not convinced of that. Especially when you tell me Zestiria and Berseria, neither of them charted.
Mm-hmm.
Zillia too, either. Just Zillia is the most recent game.
Yeah, I think Zillia is the most recent game. That's how old is that?
On Japan list.
Yeah. So
yeah, you're right. That's funny. Interesting. Yeah.
So Arise will do well globally and in North America, Europe, Japan. Hard to say.
All right. The bets are sealed. Well, come back in the year 20XX when Arise comes out.
We also got a new trailer, and I think George is really looking forward to this, for Biomutant. Obviously, this showed up a few months ago after it had been dormant for a bit. I remember when we talked about it on that previous podcast episode. I don't remember how long ago that was. It feels like it could have been 2 months or 5 months. The studio actually had a few interviews with a few other publications talking about how basically the reason why they went quiet for so long was because they refused to crunch. They just wanted to take their time and make a good product. So, like, commendable. But now we got the release date earlier. It's going to release in May. That hasn't changed, May 25th. But now we got a new combat trailer for the game. It's only about a minute long, so not a whole lot to it. I just think this game looks unique, looks interesting, doesn't look like derivative of other projects or like we're going to try our hand at something else that someone already did better. So I think it's a cool looking, unique, kind of like AA sort of RPG.
Mhm.
That's my take on it. I think it's an interesting concept.
I think
I'm really looking forward to it.
It's one of my May's absolutely stacked. So like saying it's one of the most exciting games of May is like probably actually quite a big deal because other games are like Deathloop and Resident Evil, but no, Biomutant has my number. I'm really keen for that. And it looks like a PS2 game in all the best ways. Like not graphically. I personally think like it is a little bit ugly. Like it is a little bit like what's the phrase where it's like the uncanny valley. That's it. It's a bit like that. Looking at the stuff, you're like, oh, that's not right. But then you just like get to the combat, which is what the trailer focuses on. It's just like you're just flipping about, you're just shooting guns, doing kung fu. Like it's awesome.
It's got an interesting art style. It's got an interesting premise. It just seems like it's a breath of fresh air, kind of like. And there's some like mech stuff to it too. And I'm kind of just like clicking through the trailer right now, and it is a little bit garish, maybe like the art direction. But like that's me like nitpicking. Like let me pick out something of this game to not laud praise on. But I just think it looks really. Yeah. I'm always on board for something that's just slightly different from the norm. Like let's try this out.
It's sort of stupid shit that like you would see in the PS2 era and that isn't around enough now. Where it's just like, like rabbit kung fu, cool. It's like, yeah, that's cool. Make it an RPG, even cooler. I love it.
So we've talked about this on I think the last 2 podcasts or 2 of the last 3, but we did get a little bit more details about the upcoming Mistwalker RPG Fantasian. We obviously talked about it when it had its big. It's been in progress for few years now, but we had its big like public unveiling a couple weeks ago, and then we learned a little bit about the story, premise, and characters. I think last week. We learned a little bit more about it this week, thanks to a Famitsu magazine article. Namely, the big takeaway from this is that it will release in 2 separate parts, where the first part will be 20 to 30 hours and will release basically sometime soon, and the second part will follow, still slated for this year, but it'll come in 2 halves. So that's kind of an interesting like idea. I don't know if there was any other takeaway. I didn't really poke through this Famitsu article, but
It's
how are we
always
feeling about
kinda
Fantasian?
it's always weird that like how Apple Arcade has for some projects like become like an early access ground almost. Because I remember that World's End Club released like only the first part of it, whatever that entailed, only released on Apple Arcade until its upcoming Switch release sometime. I forgot what the release date was, but I don't know. It's hard for me to get personally. It's always hard for me to get excited for projects that's like, oh, it's only coming at this early access form or this part right now, and then
Yeah, why not just wait for the second part?
the full version eventually. Like just recently, just I think even today, that what was it? The Deedlit Wonderland Labyrinth. I already forgot the Record of Lodoss War game. Like recently, just released in its full form. Like today, I want to check that out. But like just for its whole entire early access, I'm like I'm not really interested until the full version. So for me, it's hearing Fantasian. It's like it'll release not in a complete state. Like has kind of hampered my excitement for it. My curiosity for it's like okay, I'll just wait for the full release. Then.
There's also the fact that it's part of a subscription service, so it's like, if you're not already subscribed to Apple Arcade, do you get a subscription, play the first part, and like cancel the subscription, and then get another subscription later to play the second part?
That.
Yeah.
Like just wait,
Like okay, and there was like another thing. Part of this was like have scenes similar to the Lost Odyssey's 1,000 Years of Dreams thing, which is okay, cool. Why not? Those were pretty neat.
Yeah, I think those are good, and some people think they're too slow or maybe like too over long. But I don't know. I think I kind of want a few more RPGs that try like delivering their story in different ways. It doesn't always have to be presented in like just cutscenes that are in the present moment. So, long story short, I like 1,000 Years of Dreams. So the idea of something trying that same tact, like I'm all for that. Should turn out.
And the people who didn't know, those were kind of like more traditional, like text based, like style.
It's basically
honestly,
the story, music.
The story given in those is better than the main game in Lost Odyssey.
Yeah, you could like. I think the main criticism, not to go on too big a tangent of Lost Odyssey, but like Time, the protagonist of that game, as he appears in those stories, like comes across very differently as he does like in the game, and almost feels like it's like, is this story is about the same character, right? Yeah. So obviously that's probably just due. The main driving for that is because they had like a very famous, I don't remember his name offhand, but they had like a known Japanese author pen those stories who didn't pen the main game. So it's like, of course, it's going to have like a different voice and a different feel to it. So we don't know much about the details in Fantasian, but hopefully they maybe avoid those pitfalls.
Yeah. Hopefully Fantasian doesn't fall into the pitfall of like, man, these sequences, I'd rather play that game that they're telling over what I'm playing.
I'd rather just read this book rather than play through the game. But the game looks really nice. Obviously, we mentioned in one of the previous podcasts that you should go and look at those diorama set images because they are amazing, and that's still true. Here is one that I don't know how to sell. We got a surprise announcement for Google Stadia. Bueller?
I'm gonna say something here. This annoys me because this means that now there's a bunch of Falcom games with a Linux port that are never going to see the light of day.
All right, so to not bury the lead, Trails of Cold Steel 3, Trails of Cold Steel 4, Ys 8, and Ys 9 are now, or not now available. They will release on Google Stadia. Do we have a date?
Yeah, it's like April 1st. No, yeah, we do. It's April 1st for Trails of Cold Steel 3 and Ys 8. Then Trails of Cold Steel 4 will come out on April 9th, same day as the PC Switch version. And then Ys 9, probably same day as the PC Switch version, whenever that is.
And so, fun fact: when Trails in the Sky first chapter, second chapter, and the third were new on PC in the West, that's when I was still daily driving Linux. So actually, the way that I played the Trails in the Sky trilogy was on Linux. So this actually does kind of annoy me. It's like, so there's a Linux version of Ys 8 that I won't be able to play unless I pay for.
Can you explain that? Like
Google
for someone like
Stadia.
me who's dumb, what is Google Stadia like? How is that tied to Linux?
It's because the software stack is actually Linux. It uses a Linux kernel, and I'm assuming that the GPU drivers that they're using are the AMD open source ones, because that's the graphics architecture that they have on the actual Stadia server blades.
I guess I didn't know that.
It's,
Yeah, I guess kind of surprised. I don't know if a ton of people were like, this would be their chance. Like, aha, finally I can play these games, I guess.
Keep in mind that also, like, if everyone forgot that Google Stadia's monetization structure is you have to subscribe to the service and then you still have to pay full price for these games.
Though, to be fair, I don't mean to defend Stadia, but technically you only need to pay for up to 4K 60 streaming. If you're fine with 1080p 60, you just have to buy the games.
Right.
I like how Josh sounds completely unconvinced. Like,
Yeah, sure.
I mean, hey, you know what? East America got a shitload of money from Google, at least.
They double dipped on this like streaming services, because like they're supporting Luna, and now they're supporting Stadia. I mean, one thing you can definitely say about NIS America is that they know how to push their games onto as many platforms as possible. I mean, hell, they even got the Gaia 4 Complete Plus on Game Pass.
It's true. So, East America rolling in the dosh of these streaming services.
now I'm just reminded that I'm like, oh yeah, for me who was waiting for the PC version, Cold Steel 4 is coming up. So look forward to that.
You can finally play these on the go. Boot up Google Stadia on your mobile devices and then show everyone.
George can play him on his Chromebook.
But wait a second. Ys 8's already on Switch, and so is Cold Steel 3.
No, it's not with the power of Stadia.
The power of the cloud.
That's right. It's like, hey, Google sponsored me to show this off to you.
Here's another little bit of a surprise port. Final Fantasy VIII Remastered, which came out in late 2019, I believe, is now available on Google Play and iOS, so on mobile devices. So I think this is something where it's just kind of like, why not? Like, I don't know if there's any other real takeaway for this.
And think about how you have to control like those limit breaks, man. Have to do Squall's Renzo Zukin on mobile. Get those time taps in, or how about Zell's limit break? And you have to do all those inputs on mobile.
Yeah, you have to do like a button combination on like a digital.
Yeah.
But if you how do I say this? If you're curious enough to try it, go ahead and check out Remaster on mobile and check in with us. Oh, it's now available, so it is. You can get it now. It's got a discount until April 4th, $17. So the Square Enix premium.
What other tricky inputs do you have to do for people's limit breaks that would be tricky on mobile? Irvine or Irvin's like rapid shot?
No, that one's just a shoulder button, isn't it?
Those are the only two that came out to me. It was the Renzo Zukin and Zell's. Was it My Final Heaven or something? Those are the only.
It is interesting though when I look at like our game page for Final Fantasy VIII. It's got like PS1, PS4, Switch, mobile. Just kind of making the rounds.
Now you can say whatever on the go.
So a little bit for some smaller projects here. We got a release date for the upcoming Cyberpunk RPG Gamedec. So this game has kind of like been in development for a while, then I think it got delayed. It's basically like a cyberpunk isometric game. It's not dissimilar to something like Disco Elysium, where it doesn't have combat. It's focused more on story and dialogue. It is coming out on September 16th for PC. So just an interesting indie project. I think we had someone write a preview for this last year. Yes, Danny did in August of last year. She thought it had some very iffy storytelling and some bad narrative beats. So, according to her opinion, maybe this is not a game to buy on day one. See what the takeaway is when it releases. But interesting little project for people who want more cyberpunk. But it seems like we might be 0 for 2 in terms of quality cyberpunk games recently. But I don't want. I don't want to.
Dang.
Maybe
Holy shit.
maybe. I mean, that was just a preview, so maybe it'll be surprising, but it'll come out in September.
God damn.
And obviously, we have a few more other indie games that were announced or detailed over the last week with the Future Games Show and the what was the other one? The Xbox at Indie thing. Not a lot of RPGs. I did see Lawnmower Simulator was announced, which I'm always on board for, just like
There
goofy
you go.
projects like that. Like, why
The
not?
ultimate RPG.
Let's do it. But the one that I picked out that I wanted to call out was this game from, I believe, a Korean studio, Ocean Dive Studio, called Lost Eidolons. It is a strategy RPG, not dissimilar to Fire Emblem, only it has like a very like Western medieval fantasy art style to it, and it kind of looks like like an Xbox One game or something like that. But it's isometric strategy based game. Maybe it's got the art style's a little bit bland, but like other than that, it kind of looks like quality project with classes, with familiar gameplay, with kind of like a cool setting. So we Adam posted about the trailer for it. It's kind of like been in development for a while, but it's just now got the kind of getting the marketing push. We don't have any about a release date or news about a release date. It's to be announced 2022. But Lost Eidolons, I think it just looks kind of neat. A PC and console strategy RPG.
Yeah, it's like a Western Fire Emblem I see on the trailer. Interesting.
Yeah, and it shows like some of the characters changing outfits, which I assume might be class based or might just be gear based. It's hard to say. And it has kind of like the Baldur's Gate 3 style, where like the main gameplay is isometric, but the cutscenes are third person, like traditionally so. So I just think it's an interesting concept. So
Yeah.
basically it's on my radar now. So Lost Eidolons, check it out, coming next year. I didn't fill out the podcast doc with any of the other indies, but there were a few more. I don't know if anyone had any that they want to call out. There was this kind of like Dark Souls like from a Taiwanese studio called, what was it called? Thymesia,
Oh yeah, that one looks kind of neat.
where it's kind of got like the cloaked character in like one of those Plague Doctor masks. So it's slated to come out this year. It looks kind of like a Bloodborne, like basically an indie studio's take on Bloodborne.
Yeah,
So
that was pretty cool.
I know when we posted about it, some people were also excited about this slice of life fishing RPG.
Ooh,
I want to hear about this.
huh?
I mean, I think it's a Canadian studio, or at least it takes place in Canada. It's kind of like this. It's a Xbox and Steam RPG. It's got this sort of Minecrafty, blocky art style, and yeah, it's just fishing. You do story
the
arcs
game is called
and a town.
Moonglow. Sorry,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
think
called
we said
Moonglow Bay.
Bay.
Yep. So I saw some
That's-
people were really excited about that. Just fishing.
So
Hell
if
yeah.
fishing is a quintessential component of any good RPG, then clearly, when purely distilled, this is the end result.
Yeah, this is the
correct?
optimal RPG, the ultimate life form.
This is
So,
the pinnacle.
I wonder, is it like one of those things where like you level up your fishing rod or you to tackle higher level fish? What does a fishing RPG is? Huh.
not sure.
It's kind of got like a 3D dot Game Hero sort of art style, where it's like
Mm.
comprised of like, I don't know, voxels, is that what I'm going to call it?
Speaking of
And then
another
for-
game that's
Yeah,
that's
he actually
exclusive to
calls it
PlayStation 3.
Say that again,
Yeah.
James?
Speaking of another game that's exclusive to the PS3,
Yeah,
Oh,
Figure
yeah.
Out Game Heroes. Hell of a game.
Man, we're trying to get away from that sour note.
Yeah, the one that caught my eye until I found out the developer was this Astria Ascending, which is a remake of Zodiac Orcanon Odyssey from 2015. It was a mobile RPG.
And this
But,
was also shown at the Xbox Indie thing.
Yeah, and then the whole like thing for it back then was it's written by Kazushige Nojima from FF7, FF10 fame, and then music by Hitoshi Sakamoto from who did Valkyria Chronicles, FF12, and other lots of RPG classics and whatnot. So this was kind of out of nowhere, like it was teased by Famitsu, and then they had an article for it, and they showed off like a trailer for it on ID at Xbox, and I was like, oh, this is kind of neat. And like the art style is like very reminiscent of like something that Vanillaware would put out, like kind of hand painted.
I saw multiple comparisons to like Dragon's Crown.
Yeah. And then I was like, oh, this could be interesting. And then like the only thing that like that put my damper on it was the developer's Artisan Studio, Canadian developer. And then their only like notable project last time, like recently, was Super Neptunia RPG. And it's like, I don't know about that, man. Super Neptunia.
Well, I also
RPG,
heard
not
like so
great.
obviously this game isn't clearly marketed as a remake, even though it is, because this game is called Astria Ascending, but it's a remake of Zodiac Orcanon Odyssey, which I don't know anything about, but like I've heard people, as soon as people like realize that, like that itself put a damper on it, because apparently that game is not very good. This
Well,
is
okay,
through the
so,
grapevine. It might be hearsay, but
and I guess like this has like the same, like I don't know if it's like the exact same characterization, but has the same like character designs and characters from that game. But then like they're saying that like the story is all new. It's going to be a much darker story. So like there's a remake in the sense of like it's going to be a completely new game, but still the same character designs, I guess. And it's coming out.
It's like a remake, but it's like how do you put it? Like let's just try this game again, only do it
Take
better
two.
this time. Hopefully.
Mulligan on the first time we did this.
But yeah, hearing that this game was a remake of a game that wasn't received very well, made by the developer of a game that wasn't received very well, it's like, oh, okay.
What's going
Like,
on? Yeah,
I'm not as excited anymore.
Yeah,
maybe it'll be good. But
maybe I guess we'll have to see. This is coming out this sometime this year for PS5, PS4, the Xbox Series consoles, Xbox One, Switch, and Steam.
Everything except Stadia. What in the world?
Oh, and it's also going to be available on Xbox Game Pass at launch as well. So we'll see. I guess I don't know. I don't know what to make of it.
I don't think it looks that good.
The trailer's so weird. I don't like the character's walk animation in the trailer. It looks like a horse moving around.
So they have like these
honest,
exaggerated proportions, sort of like the characters in Dragon's Crown in terms of the character design, which is fine. But I feel like they kind of like walk pigeon-toed with these legs that are like 60% of their body, and it's like they took too many steps where it's like now it almost feels like maybe not uncanny valley is the right thing, but am I still looking at human beings here?
Like, yeah, that's not how human anatomy works. But moving around,
like I can understand like exaggerating to make like an artistic
like a stylized art
distinction,
style,
but I feel like they turn too many knobs up, where at some point you lose something where it no longer, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like, oh, okay, it's so, and I just don't like it. Has like that puppet style movement where like the characters kind of have like 2 or 3 like vertexes that they kind of like wiggle or like idle on. Does that make sense? And that sort of art style I've never really kind of liked, and this game does have plenty of that.
I thought it was kind of funny how some people mentioned like, why does this game look like a mobile game? It's like, well, it was a mobile game.
Like but one of the few times where it's like, well, actually,
yeah. That just reminds me, like, that just reminds me when we first pushed the Scarlet Grace review. I had a bunch of people saying, "Oh, this looks like a mobile game," and then they said, "Look, it's on iOS and Android. It's a mobile port." It's like, actually, no, it came out on Vita first. It's just a coincidence that it has mobile versions.
And Vita is a mobile console, to be fair, as well, or handheld.
Take it back. Take it back.
But yeah, it comes out this year at some point on everything, including Game Pass. So maybe Morbid Curiosity will just try it out. Why not? Other than that, that's everything I had listed for the podcast. So some cool indie titles to talk about, some new information about stuff like SaGa Frontier Remastered, and then kind of like a harsh, real talk about game preservation of all things. But I think it was kind of a nice discussion to have. And obviously, go ahead and look at that list that we published for any games that you are interested in, because you might not have a chance for much longer.
Wait, are we going to talk about
obviously,
Titan?
of course. Wait, did I miss one?
Just as a last thing, I guess this is important for me and James. Me and James have this is personal for me and James. So I listed here before we wrap up this Type Moon corner. So this week, a new issue of the Type Moon Ace magazine came out, and these issues very rarely come out. They only come out when big Type Moon projects come out. Tide Moon, obviously, the most people will know them from Fate Grand Order, the mobile RPG. But we talked about it on a past podcast around the beginning of the year when the Tsukihime remake was re-announced. There's a new surprise project that came out that was announced that didn't leak from this new Type Moon Ace issue, that a new Melty Blood game is coming out.
And it's not like an update. It's like a totally new Melty Blood that's more in line with like Under Night in Birth.
Okay, so people who don't know, Melty Blood is
these are a lot of weird words without context, like Melty Blood.
Yeah.
Do you want to know the most recent title for the like current Melty Blood?
Okay, so before we go into that, Melty Blood is a long-running fighting game series that was originally spun off as a fan game on a fan as a fan game from a fan disc of Tsukihime. So with that in mind, know that this is developed by French Bread. That's the developer name. They are the developer behind the Under Night in Birth series, whose most recent title is Under Night in Birth EXE late in brackets ST tist. So EXE.
No.
What was that?
In brackets CL-R and bracket.
Oh, right. It's clear now. Yeah.
Clear.
Okay, so what's the last release of Melty Blood before
Melty Blood Actress Again current code
version 1.07? Yeah, and now this one is scaling it back. It's just called Melty Blood Type Lumina, and this is based on the Tsukihime remake, not the original Tsukihime. So this has the character designs from the new Tsukihime, A Piece of Blue Glass Moon remake. The most surprising thing about this was this is pretty much like this is how ideally you want to announce fighting games that aren't leaked is one, this is confirmed for a worldwide release this year. So this is coming out to English regions as well. The two, this has release platforms. It's coming to PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. 3, they confirmed in an interview with Kamine, one of the head-ups at French Bread, is that it'll have rollback netcode, which is the new fighting game standard for netcode because it's very smooth. And 4, important info for people who are invested in the Melty Blood series of what may be returning, what may be cut. Since Kamine was very upfront that a lot of the Melty Blood original characters, the new characters that were introduced in the Melty Blood games, aren't coming back at the moment because canonically, timeline wise, they aren't introduced yet in the remake timeline. So at least giving fans the heads up, some of the favorite characters that you may be familiar with are returning right now, like characters like Lan, characters like how do you pronounce her name? It's like Riesbyfe. That's her name. It's like Reese beef or beef, but people just call her roast beef just for simplicity's sake.
Makes sense.
Yeah, like characters like Coma and whatnot. Yep. So it's nice that important info is already out there. Just expect this will be a first release of a reinvigorated series, so there might be not as many characters returning. So that was really cool. Just to see hey, there's a new Melty Blood fighting game that I really like these days because movement in them is so fun. It's very free form. And there's wacky combos unlike how you might see Street Fighter. It's a very grounded game. There are pokes and basic combos. Melty Blood combos are very weird. Where say you do a low punch on someone, you can eventually get this same combo, launch them into the air, and then as they're ascending, you're hitting them as they're ascending, and then end that combo with an air throw. And that's just a weird thing that not many fighting games how they flow these days. You can just do that in Melty Blood. So there's only since the announcement. This is initial announcement. There's only very few characters. You have the main characters of Tsukihime obviously returning, Tonoshiki, Akiha, Arcuade, Seal, and whatnot. And then there's more Melty Blood intrinsic systems that they kind of tease in the screenshots but haven't really detailed. So that's really cool. And then if
you're at all a fan of fighting games, be sure to buy Under Night in Birth and play it. It is really good.
Yeah, Summer Night in Birth, very fantastic fighting game from French Bread as well. Obviously, unfortunately doesn't have rollback netcode, but it's still a really cool game. Just the mechanics of it are really cool. They finally gave a release date in Japan for the Tsukihime A Piece of Blue Glass Moon remake. That's coming August 26th in Japan. Unfortunately, who knows if there's going to be a localization or not. The weird thing about this remake that they shared is that this remake will only adapt near side content, which is only 2 routes of the 5 of the original. So that'll be the Arcuade and Seal routes. They're like the two main characters in that. For a lot of people, that's kind of a big bummer because a lot of people's favorite routes are in the Far Side content. And the Far Side has Akiha, Hisui, and Kohaku. That's their routes there. And a lot of like their favorite, a lot of people have their favorites in the Tsukihime series, and a lot of the Far Side content is like their favorite events happen in that side. So they've revealed in the interview about Tsukihime remake in that Type Moon Ace issue is like they're still thinking about, they're still gonna remake Far Side. They're still thinking about it. They don't know how they're gonna release it yet, but it's in the books. It's in the plans. Who knows when it's gonna release? But as you know, to offset this, the Arcuate and Seal routes in this upcoming remake will have a lot of content. They're saying like it might have like double the volume of Tsukihime, which is a lot already.
Yeah, it's already a pretty decent sized VN, so it's like, oof. I think one of the most notable things that has been announced is that the reasoning why it's not the remake isn't coming to PC, or at least the reason, air quotes, is they put so much effort into it, so they want people to play it on a big TV. They're releasing the game on Switch.
Yeah. Just Kiniko Nasu, the writer, the main scenario writer of these Type Moon games, he's like, just kind of like my egotistical, side seeking that I want people to experience this on a big screen with like a nice sound system and whatnot. It's like, dude, come on, you're placing it on Switch as well. So hopefully this remake eventually comes to PC. We don't know when.
Well, at least Melty Blood, even if we can't play it at least, even though we can't play it in the bathroom with our laptops, you can still bring your Switch into the restroom.
It's true. There's a lot of the Melty Blood community is fairly small, so there's a lot of inside jokes around it of because the Melty Blood community is very loyal to their game. And the joke is they'll literally play this game anywhere. So there's a lot of there have been play sessions of people playing on their laptops in the bathroom with other people. So it's kind of a weird inside joke.
The last time I went to a proper fighting game local, it was like this house party, and it was mostly just for Under Night in Birth, but there was also stuff like Soul Calibur 2. Somebody set up Virtua Fighter through Yakuza 6 and all that. Really fun time. Halfway through it, somebody just set up a laptop in the bathroom with Melty Blood running on it. So,
you guys are crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the last thing.
My takeaway is that Melty Blood is a fighting game that you play in bathrooms.
Yes,
pretty much. All right. It's natural environment.
And then the last thing about the Tsukihime thing that I guess is worth sharing is there's so much happening, changing up and expanding the scenario where the game now takes place 10 days before the events of what actually happens in the main game. So it's filling out a lot of just the general world and lore, I guess. It's interesting. It's very exciting to me and James as general fans of Type Moon products. I just wanted to bring that up. I know
the thing that's really interesting. Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting is he's outright saying that he wants to make Tsukihime more important to the overall Nasuverse. So that's going to be interesting to see how that works out.
It's even to the point where since a lot of Type Moon fans and their first exposure to it is Fate Grand Order mobile game, that Tsukihime is going to be so intrinsic to that narrative where certain things that happen in the Tsukihime remake will establish this is a why certain events in Fate Grand Order has happened is because they the Tsukihime remake kind of sets the beginning point of this is why things happen in Fate Grand Order. So it's kind of weird how they're going to recontextualize that and how it'll be important to the mobile game as well. And the mobile game is already very famous, makes a lot of money, obviously, but it's very famous for just having like a very deep narrative, and a lot of people are invested. Not just for the gameplay. The gameplay is like the worst part, arguably the worst aspect of Fate Grand Order, for the deep narrative that it has. So yeah, I mean it was very it's surprising and exciting to see that a new Melty Blood game has been announced and is coming in English this year. It's with rollback, and it's like, oh my god, what the hell is happening? That's crazy. That's crazy.
You know what
I'm
this
so
means,
happy.
Josh, right? The Undernight engine supports rollback now.
Oh my god, it's true. It's true. But that's all I have to say about it.
If you were able to follow that, I envy you. I'm just kidding. I'm playing it up a bit. I'm being cheeky.
I get it.
But no, it's always cool to have an exciting game of especially in this era of so many things being like when will we see Starfield next, or whoever. Just having a game saying it's announced, it's coming out this year is always kind of cool.
Look, all I'm saying is us Tsukihime fans have been waiting a long, long time for this remake.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we'll start wrapping up. Thank you for listening. We are here every week. If you want to read about James's review or watch it, you can go visit it on the site at rpgsite.net or on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/rpgsite.net. We do have a Twitter account at rpgsite. We also do have an Instagram account and a Facebook under the same name. You can always join our Discord channel by going to our homepage and clicking the link at the top. And other than that, stay safe, take care, and you'll hear from us next week.